Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the public board meeting of the Care Quality Commission. Frequent watchers will know my name's Ian Dilks. I'm the chair. You'll see we have more people in the room than usual. That's because we have already invited in our presenters for the first session, but I'll introduce them, or they'll introduce themselves in a few minutes' time. A few other welcomes just before we start. Drew Noble, over in the corner there, is our Equality Network representative. As you know, we always have somebody, so welcome, Drew. Immediately on my right, Kate Staples. I think we did introduce her last meeting, but she hadn't quite joined, was just observing, but she has now been appointed as our legal advisor, so always sits next to the chair. That's very helpful to me. I would also just like to introduce Jeremy Boss. Jeremy is not a board member, but he has for some time been the independent, one of the two independent members of our Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. As you know, our Audit Committee chair left at the end of December. We don't yet have approval to recruit a successor, which means we don't have a chair sitting on the board currently. But Jeremy kindly agreed to take on this as an interim role, and I can tell you from experience has been doing a tremendous job there. So, Jeremy, thank you for that. But it also, to enable Jeremy to do his job properly, it seemed to be sensible to include him in wider, broad discussions. So, Jeremy is here today and will be briefly presenting a report back from the last Audit and Risk Assurance Committee shortly. I think in terms of introductions, I hope I've included everybody. Oh, sorry, Joyce. Yes, first time you've joined us. So Joyce Frederick, a number of you will have met her before, a Director of Policy and Strategy, so she's often presented here, but has now joined the executive team, so will be joining us as a member of that team at future meetings. I haven't been notified of any new declarations of interest. I'll take those. There are none. Thank you very much. I haven't been notified of any urgent matters to add to the agenda, but I'll just say I have slotted in, it'll only take a few moments, but a couple of board appointments that I will slot in at the end of the agenda, but we'll explain that when we get there. So the first item, and indeed the main item on the agenda today, is the independent review into the handling of protected disclosures and listening, learning, responding to concerns review. You'll forgive us if we slot into the LLRC. We find that easier to say than the longer description. If we say LLRC, that's what we mean. I'm not going to give a long introduction to this, but for those who have been following CQC, and we know that includes a number of colleagues who are, I think, listening in this afternoon, have a particular interest in two pieces of work we kicked off a few months ago. The first was in response to the Employment Tribunal for Mr. Kumar, which we lost, which caused us to look at a number of things internally. And I won't steal the thunder of those coming later, but we asked Zoe Leventhal, KC, I still tend to call you a QC, my apologies, KC now, to carry out an independent review of the specifics around that, and there is a very long report as a consequence, which I will comment on in just a moment. And then, as a result of a number of other things going on in the organisation, we decided to carry out in some ways related, but a separate review, and that was led by Scott Dureraj, who is over there. Scott had literally just joined CQC, but before he was ever allowed to start his proper job, we purloined him to lead this piece of work. And then he, in turn, set up a structure with a number of independent people who I'll allow to introduce themselves in just a moment. So there are two reports resulted from that. They were circulated to the board as part of the board pack in accordance with all practice a week ago. But the management team hadn't seen them before, so it didn't seem appropriate to put them into the public domain immediately. But they should be, I believe, in the public domain now as we're speaking. If not, they will be very shortly, and certainly they're available to colleagues within the organisation. So the way we're going to handle this, I'm going to hand over to Scott and Zoe and colleagues in just a moment to say a little bit more about the structure, to very briefly introduce themselves, and then going to ask Zoe to talk through her report, Scott and his colleagues to talk through the work that they have done, which overall I would think will probably take half an hour or so from here, 30, 35 minutes, and then we'll allow time for questions from my colleagues. The management team, other than getting it as part of the papers last week, have not had an opportunity to do this, so we don't have a formal management response. That will have to follow. But I am going to ask Ian Trenham, as the Chief Executive, just to give some immediate responses so that people have an understanding of the, I suppose, the gut reaction, if I can put it that way, of the management team to what they've heard. And then I will just flag it now, but there is a briefing for colleagues later on this afternoon, which a couple of people, Kate and Ali, who was part of the non-executive from this board who sat on the oversight group for this work, and I'll also ask Ali to talk later on as well. But they will be leaving us at about 4 o'clock to lead a discussion with our colleagues internally. So I hope I've covered the main points in terms of process. So, Scott and Zoe, could I turn over to you to firstly ask you to introduce yourselves very briefly, then your colleagues can introduce themselves so we know who's here, and then Zoe, perhaps turn to you first of all to cover your report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm Zoe Leventhal, KC from Matrix Chambers, and I'll hand straight over to Scott.
Thank you. I'm Scott Drayraj. I'm the Director of the LLR Review.
Afternoon. I'm Anne Robson, and I'm a Human Resource Director and an independent member of the review panel.
Good afternoon. I'm R. Peter Dutt. I'm an independent legal member of the review panel and a lawyer by profession.
Hello everyone, I'm Joy Warmington, also an independent review panel member with some expertise around issues of race.
Zoe, so I think it's over to you first.
Thank you very much. I'm going to present a brief summary of my review. I'll start with a brief introduction, secondly my key findings, and thirdly my recommendations. By way of introduction, there are two parts to my review. First of all, I was asked to look at how CQC as a regulator responded to the concerns that Mr. Shyam Kumar raised with it. And secondly, I was also asked to look at a sample of other cases where similar concerns had been raised by CQC's, with CQC by staff members within NHS trusts. For those who don't know, Mr. Kumar's a consultant orthopaedic surgeon in the NHS, and he was also at the time a specialist advisor with CQC, which means that from time to time he'd attend inspections alongside CQC inspectors to provide clinical insight into surgery. So I focused on, number one, how did CQC use the information in its role as the independent regulator of healthcare to decide whether the trusts were meeting fundamental standards? Secondly, whether it took appropriate action. And thirdly, I was asked specifically to look at whether the ethnicity of the person or persons raising the concern played any role in the way that the concerns were addressed. So before I turn to deal with my findings, I just wanted to thank everybody at the CQC and beyond who's assisted with my review. It's been a long process, and all of my interviewees have given very willingly of their time, and I'm very grateful to them, and also to all the wider staff within the organisation and beyond who've supported me. Also special thanks to Mr. Kumar himself, whose willingness and openness to this process is a testament to his professionalism and his commitment to improving patient care. So in terms of my findings, the second part of what I will say today, Mr. Kumar raised three sets of concerns, and there were at least two other sets of concerns he raised which were properly dealt with by CQC. So the three sets of concerns that I've looked at, first of all, one dates back to 2015, which is obviously some time ago. He wrote to the CQC following an inspection at a hospital in the North East to make a complaint about it. His concerns related to clinical issues within orthopaedics, which he thought were not being properly looked into, and an issue about the conduct of the team at the inspection. Unfortunately, what I found is that it was never properly looked into and he never received a proper response. It's not clear from the records that there are whether CQC properly took on board the information he raised. So that's the first set of issues. The second, in 2018, Mr. Kumar raised concerns with CQC in his capacity as an employee of his trust, so in his capacity as a consultant orthopaedic surgeon. He was concerned about patient safety because of a series of serious clinical incidents that had arisen at that time in orthopaedics. I have found that he wasn't ever properly treated as a whistleblower by CQC. Nobody ever met him to talk to him and to hear his concerns directly. This was a major missed opportunity, I found. CQC did go in to inspect shortly thereafter, partly as a result of the issues that he raised, but it didn't focus on those issues. And so although CQC engaged with the Trust over this period, I couldn't see any meaningful regulatory scrutiny and any action taken to hold the Trust to account in terms of governance or in terms of duty of candour. And the third set of concerns he raised, Mr. Kumar attended another inspection in 2018, and he wrote afterwards raising a concern about resourcing. He was the only special advisor providing input across 2 hospital sites on all aspects of surgery, and he raised some other specific issues. Again, he never received a proper response at the time. In fact, most of the specific issues he raised were addressed by CQC in the inspection process, but because of the communication problem, he was unclear about what happened. And when he complained about it, he didn't get a response until it was raised with him on behalf of his MP with the Ombudsman. So those are the findings, and I'll just then move on to touch on the sample and the recommendations. But before I do, in terms of the themes that I've seen coming out, first is the importance of obviously communication as a key way of ensuring that these issues don't arise. Secondly, ensuring that CQC can and does grapple with clinical issues that arise on inspections and as part of its monitoring. And thirdly, ensuring that CQC is properly scrutinising what trusts are doing in these areas where concerns are raised. So just briefly to summarise my findings on the sample, I looked at 18 other cases in total, and I saw a lot of good practice within CQC in dealing with concerns raised. I saw examples of really positive empathy and communication with people raising concerns, good supportive management relationships to enable those concerns to be properly dealt with and to ensure the right response was taken, and really positive outcomes from those. So it's important to note that. Many examples showed that speaking up had made a really positive difference and that CQC had helped make that happen by taking quick and effective action in response. However, the sample did also throw up some areas for improvement, and I'm going to touch on 2 in particular. First of all, that the system for recording and monitoring this kind of information is seriously problematic. To find out what had really happened in a number of these cases, it was necessary to talk to the individuals involved. And once I did, I found out a lot more. So that's one important aspect. And the second is that I did find a series of examples where it seemed that CQC had accepted too readily what the Trust was saying and not challenged or scrutinised the trusts on areas of importance such as patient safety and discrimination. Overall, in terms of findings on ethnicity, I didn't identify any specific evidence that the way that Mr. Kumar's concerns had been addressed related to his ethnicity. What I did observe from a range of evidence was that there's a lack of confidence generally within CQC in dealing with allegations of race discrimination, and that this is something which obviously CQC should address. So I have made 4 recommendations to the board. The first is that there should be a full apology to Mr. Kumar, and I know that's a point which is already being taken on board, in terms of how he was treated, how he was communicated with, and how his concerns were or weren't addressed. My second and third recommendations are related to the role of special advisors within CQC. They obviously have a vital role in enabling CQC to meet its regulatory functions by providing it with the relevant clinical expertise. And so recommendation 2 sets out detailed steps to integrate SPAs better within CQC in terms of management structure, feedback and appraisal, and critically being involved after the inspection as part of corroboration and drafting the report. The third recommendation is to ensure that CQC can access their clinical expertise during inspections and also during monitoring. Otherwise, as my review has shown, there are risks that issues get missed or not focused on, or indeed that the inspection teams are not able on site to deal with the issues that arise. And there are 2 aspects to this recommendation. Firstly, the right SPAs need to be on the right inspections. So I've recommended that the existing project that I understand is progressing, to do this via intelligent-led matching in advance, it should be prioritised and adapted and improved. And secondly, SPAs and inspectors need to be trained to work together more and to understand their joint roles more, especially so that inspectors can engage better with the right clinical expertise, and also so that SPAs can understand the numerous competing objectives sometimes that inspectors are dealing with on site. Fourthly and finally, in terms of recommendations, I would recommend new or improved systems for accessing and monitoring whistleblowing information. And I know this is a theme that's also come out of the other parts of the report which you'll hear about, so that there is a consistent way of putting this information into a system and an easy and accessible way of extracting it so that you know what action has been taken. And there needs to be proper training for this to be done over time, not just once at an induction stage. I think that this training needs to include how to deal with allegations of race discrimination being made, to ensure that CQC understands its important regulatory role in this context and its role in working together with the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And this will generally build confidence, I think, in dealing with these issues across the organisation. So that concludes my summary. Thank you very much indeed for involving me in this important piece of work.
Zoe, so thanks very much indeed. For those that have now had a chance to look at it, that was an excellent summary and about 6 minutes of 200 and some odd pages, so thank you for that. As I said earlier, we won't take questions on Zoe's report now. Let's look at the totality of it and we'll take questions for the next lot. Before I turn to Scott, Kate, do you want to say anything by way of introduction to this piece of work?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Kate Taroney and I was the exec sponsor for this review. So firstly, thank you, Zoe, for the summary. You'll note as you read through the review that there is a good read across of the themes Zoe finds in phase 1 and the themes that we uncovered in phase 2 as well. So before we get into that, I just want to start off by saying thank you to Scott, who's provided incredible leadership on this work over the last 6 months or so. I'd like to thank our workstream leads and a number of other colleagues who have made the report possible. In particular, I want to thank our staff forums, our staff equality networks who have engaged with the report that you find in front of you. And also I want to acknowledge and recognise the positive change in relationship that we've had with our unions over the past few months, accumulating in a meeting a couple of us had last week where I feel increasingly optimistic that we will be able to work together to think about what we do next in light of these findings. And finally, I'd like to thank our 3 independent panel members, Anne, Peter and Joy, whose expertise and challenge I think has really added a robustness to our approach. And finally, this wouldn't have happened without Mr. Kumar, so I'd like to extend my personal thanks for his engagement in this. Throughout this, Mr. Kumar has been absolutely unrelenting in his focus on wanting to improve patient safety, but also he's been really keen in thinking about how he can support us to improve as an organisation, which is pretty remarkable in light of what happened and the findings of the Employment Tribunal. So I wanted to say a specific thank you to Mr. Kumar. So turning to the review now, it would be fair to say that this is a really difficult read. And as you work your way through the chapters, the work streams, every area that the review looked at found things that we could and should have done better. And I think it's really important as an organisation that we take the time to fully digest what this report tells us about how we work before the natural instinct of leaping to action. So we need to take a moment, really pause and reflect on what these findings tell us. However, this does need to be a catalyst for change and action, and that absolutely is going to be what happens. And that change needs to come in order for the public to continue to feel confident giving us critical information about the quality of care that they receive. But also that change needs to come so that our staff, our people, feel valued and supported in the essential jobs they do every day, going out there, making sure people get safe, effective, high-quality care. So I just wanted to extend my thanks, really invite us as an organisation to pause and reflect on what this review tells us. But also, I know we will all be equally committed to seeing this review propel us forward into a series of changes that absolutely will need to happen on the back of that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Scott. Over to you, Scott.
Okay, Scott, so do you want to explain the review? I'll use you to decide how you want to do it, but explain where your colleagues fitted in as well. So over to you.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Kate. So let's start with a simple context. So the best-led organisations are ones that quickly recognise and identify their own failings respond humanely with an open mind, with a focus on learning and not blame, and take accountability. And of course, more importantly, lead in the addressing and delivering their own improvements. The CQC, in my view, agreed with the need to engage both openly and honestly, and also focused on rebuilding trust and confidence and acting in a way the regulator would expect that of those organisations for which it regulates. So the review of Mr Kumar cases we've just heard is covered in its totality in phase 1, which is Zoe's report. And of course the reports are online in 2 parts to recognise the distinct nature of a fully independent report and a report that had independent governance and some independent people doing the work. With regards to phase 2, work streams 1, 2, 3 and 5. So work stream 1 is whistleblowing, 2 is speak up, 3 is legal case handling, and 5 is how we hear from the public. And just a small section of work stream 4. They are all the things that CQC does on a day in, day out basis. That's our core purpose. Work stream 4, the 2 elements that affect staff and do impact on staff, but often are focused in a singular moment in time of decision making and governance. That's important when we consider the work streams and also keeping people safe in health and care. So we have a huge number of staff that come in and focus on keeping people safe in health and care on a regular basis and on a daily basis. So the review examined on the basis of an impact and intent, and the review team and I want to highlight that irrespective of the absence of intent, it does not eradicate or in any way minimise the impact. So the impacts on Mr Kumar, his family, and the impact on patients, the wider population, the impact upon the CQC with regards to its public and clinical confidence, as a regulator that listens, inclusivity is supportive and of course learns. So before agreeing to take on this review, I was grateful for Mr Kumar, Mr Shyam Kumar, in speaking with me ahead of the review starting, because I wanted to connect with where he was feeling, his experiences and his concerns, and to do justice to those that see the important role of the CQC and all of the staff who come to work every day focused on that safety of people in care. So I trust when people have had a chance to read the review, and as we've heard, there's 2 reviews, both at around 140 pages or so, they'll reflect upon the content, and I hope that they feel the team and I have responded with vigour and challenge that we were presented with at the start of the review. So again, to end, I have to thank Mr Kumar, who really helped me establish the foundations of this work, and as always, as we've heard, only focused on wanting to be heard and assist the CQC to improve. I do need to thank the trade unions and the staff networks who helped me recruit independent colleagues working on the different elements, but also are clearly partners in the future improvement of the organisation as well. To end, I did hear concerns that were made that will the CQC deliver on the review? And quite uniquely, I think, we then did spend time on ensuring there was an evaluation recommendations for the work. So you will see in the documentation there is a strong emphasis on recommendations of evaluation and how that should be done and the timescales that should be done with, and also continuing with the expertise and the challenge and the rigour, which should help and aim to build confidence in the public and any external stakeholders that the independent panel have done. And I have recommended in the review that the independent panel members should come back as part of the evaluation process. So I hope it builds confidence and demonstrates improvement, and I hope people are able to read the review and take time to consider what it says. But there is a level of honesty and candour that I think is unusual in this respect. And I did want to just address the issues of race towards the end. So again, remember, Mr Shyam Kumar didn't raise race in the tribunal, but this organisation agreed with me that we should consider race when a man of Indian descent had been disengaged. And that is a very proactive step, and one that I haven't seen in my 32 years in working in race and inequalities and healthcare leadership. So I do think that does need to be acknowledged. So at that point, we're going to be moving on to the independent panel members around Arpita and joy.
Scott, just before we turn to the panel members, could you just say a little bit more about why and how we had independent people engaged? I think it would just give a little bit of context to their remarks.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Chair. So normally when you do these kind of reviews, it's quite important to separate it from the board, and normally we would have had the senior independent director, but he was due to leave, so that's why Ali stepped in. And Ali was really helpful because ethnicity was important, the clinical leadership, and also for Mr. Kumar to, to start building that psychological safety, I think was important. But we did need a view, independent view, on both HR/OD expertise, the legal elements of whistleblowing, and the wider determinants, as well as race and human rights kind of perspective. So Anne, Arpita and Joy were recruited to the independent review panel, who have ensured that the board have not had any editorial input, have not been able to change, but also to challenge and check as the review was going on from an early stage, the terms of reference, the scope, the questions that were being asked in the interviews and the workshops that designed the review.
So could I pass to you?
Thank you, Chair. We've been asked to say a few words this afternoon, and some of what I'm about to say actually resonates with Zoe, Kate and Scott. Firstly, I wanted to say that there's been a huge degree of willingness by all of the staff members that I've engaged with in the CQC over the last few months. Their willingness to engage and participate, despite the fact that they're still working on their business as usual pressures, and bearing in mind that the timescale was quite ambitious. There's also been a noticeable desire in many quarters to do things differently, which is more than helpful and needs to be capitalised on. The recommendations are very challenging. They're hard hitting and they're wide ranging. As an HR director reflecting upon them, what I particularly welcomed seeing was that the recommendations are very clear, and they give a really solid roadmap about where to go in order to achieve the improvements that need to be achieved. And then finally, it was to pick up on the point that you made, Scott, around I was also pleased to see that evaluation is built into the review, and also continued scrutiny, both of which I think will be really helpful in driving that change and seeing results. Thanks, Arpita.
Thank you, Anne. So I have a specialist background in whistleblowing law and practice. And as Scott mentioned, my role has been to review not only the progress, but also advise, help unblock, and scrutinise. And I've observed that throughout the period of the review, the work has been conducted with diligence, with candour, and with tremendous goodwill. The focus really has been on improvement. There's been due regard and importance looking back from the work streams by each work stream lead at the importance of the work to public trust and confidence, the importance of the work to workers' trust and confidence, and a look to see that the improvements are to the functions and to the resilience of the CQC. The aim, of course, should be that the CQC not only improves, but becomes an exemplar in all of these areas. Turning to whistleblowing, nobody wants to whistleblow, but whistleblowers provide an important public service, and they act with moral courage. The information they provide can prevent serious abuse or harm continuing and can help to improve standards. Often the trauma they experience from whistleblowing is too high, and the report recognises this. The report recognises that whistleblowers need to be listened to, and the information they impart will be used to protect the public and staff, and is likely to go a long way to improve their trust and confidence. And it's hoped the findings will do so. There are key findings about consistency and clarity in the use of whistleblowing processes, communication, in training, and how concerns should be dealt with. There's a very welcome progress in a new freedom to speak up policy. But of course, to be effective, the CQC must ensure that in the workplace, in its own workplace, it is inclusive and that workers feel psychologically safe to speak up. Looking forward, I think the real test will be in the implementation phase and to ensure that the intended impacts are achieved. The recommendations must become part of a culture of improved learning and development and be embedded into the DNA of the CQC.
So I just really had only a couple more comments to make. So my area of expertise has been working for a charity that works a lot with organisations who are dealing with discrimination, not just in the NHS but wider. And I think what the review tells us, not very unsurprisingly, is that racism, unfortunately, is very much a product of our society. And it really isn't surprising that the review found a lack of understanding and a lack of attention being paid to be able to really explore and to delve into these issues as part of the work. And I think, as Scott said, it's really great in terms of leadership that the CQC gazed in this direction. It didn't have to. It didn't have to pick this up. And I think that's actually showing a lot of courage to the rest of the system in terms of how they can begin to take this work forward. I think in terms of responding specifically to the recommendations, this, I think, is a real opportunity for the CQC to really critically address the issue of competency and capabilities required to really improve on race discrimination and racial disparities within the system. And I think if it was to be able to grasp the mantle of that and to really think about how it does that well, it can really send a message to the system, to the wider system, on how they can improve standards and measurements of progress around this agenda. So I really look forward to seeing something that's different, something that can be at pace and something that can be at depth, which really begins to address some of the widespread issues that emerge far too frequently within our health and social care system. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. What I'd like to do now is, we did mention Ali was part of, we asked as a non-executive member of the board to sit in on the oversight group. I'd be interested in your observations just about the way it was handled, because this is obviously the first time the board have had a chance to consider this. And I say then I'd perhaps turn to Ian just to give a few quick reactions.
Thank you. I think it's been very well said by all colleagues talking about the processes and the work that led to this report, that it's been an extremely professional, diligent approach to delivering a very thorough report. And again, I want to echo everyone's thanks for putting this report together and bringing it to the board. I'm personally very pleased that we've delivered a report openly and transparently, and that it's had a substantial amount of independent report input, which hopefully provides confidence to everyone who is reading and reviewing this report. As has been mentioned, there are several areas where we need to do better. It is challenging to face these, but I think everyone also recognises the criticality that we do address them. What's really clear throughout this process for everyone I've interacted with is that there is a commitment towards improving these areas that need to improve, and a positivity about the impact that addressing these areas will have on our role and on the wider ecosystem. So I don't have a great deal to add, save to thank everyone involved in the review and who'll be involved in taking this forward, and to again thank Mr. Kumar.
Okay, so thanks. So we've heard an awful lot about the reports and the process. Ian, I know it's a bit unfair because you only saw this a few days ago, but any initial, or what are your initial reactions?
Thanks very much, Ian. I think we've talked a little bit about the form of the report and the independent component of it. And I think the idea of bringing together independent experts from outside, working alongside colleagues internally, has been really effective. And it was set up in this way to deliberately give us a lot of detailed material relatively quickly that we could then use to take action. The consequence of doing this report, though, in this way means that there's a lot of material and then there are a number of issues that do need thinking about, some of which have got obvious and straightforward actions and some of which do not. So I'm keen that we don't rush to looking for actions today and focusing on superficial actions and rush past that deeper learning that I think many of colleagues have spoken to. Before I talk about my immediate reflections, I wanted to formally record some thanks. I think most importantly, I want to thank Mr. Kumar himself for raising the concerns in the first place, and in particular for the really constructive way he's talked to us during the review. I know, speaking to colleagues all the way through this, they've talked in glowing terms about Mr. Kumar's approach and his willingness to talk to us. I mean, frankly, he could have quite understandably refused to work with us at all, and that would have been understandable. But instead, he did exactly the opposite. And I think that's a real tribute to his desire to see improvements in health and social care. It's a tribute to his desire to see an improvement in the way that we regulate, and I think it's probably most importantly a tribute to his personal values. So, Mr. Kumar, thank you. Thank you also to Scott Dureraj, for his leadership and skill in bringing together some really complex and emotive work 2 weeks into a new job in a relatively short period of time. So thank you, Scott. Thank you to board colleagues, Kate Taroney for her day-to-day executive leadership of this, and to Ali Hassan for his non-executive oversight. I know colleagues, again, have really valued Ali's insight and support. Thank you also to Joe, Peter and Anne for your honest reflections, both here and indeed the support you've given us all the way through. So thank you. Thank you also to a number of colleagues. Many people have talked so far about the way in which colleagues have really leaned into this review and have been open and honest and want to improve. And I think that's a really good sign in terms of our ability to take the actions and run with them and really make something happen. So thank you to those colleagues, whether they were workstream leads, whether they were involved in giving evidence, if you will, to the investigation, or in any one of a number of ways to get us to this point. So thank you to all of them. There's a lot here in terms of recommendations, and I think, as I've said, it's important that we digest it all before we jump to a handful of actions. Inevitably, I think there will be some things that catch the eye, individual recommendations that perhaps create their own headline. But I think it is important to see this as a whole package, as a group of recommendations. And as other people have said, this is in a number of places quite uncomfortable reading. But there are lessons for everyone in the organisation here. There are things for us around this table. There are things for me. There are things for my executive team, and I in no way shy away from that. But I think when taken as a whole, there are things for all of us at CQC, every single one of us, in terms of every single employee. There's something in it, in this report for everybody, and we need to look at this as a group of recommendations. And I saw 3 groups of recommendations in the report. Processes that need updating or improving. Some recommendations around process discipline, where we had processes, but they maybe weren't always followed. And probably the biggest group, and arguably the most difficult to make progress on, but one which is the most important to make progress on, is one around culture and our ability to walk in other people's shoes. In terms of the processes that need updating or improving, it's clear that the way we managed Mr. Kumar's disengagement, that we needed to be clearer about how we work with specialist advisors, what they expect of us and what we expect of them. And we are doing a full review of our complementary workforce at the moment that Zoe alluded to. And that, I hope, will offer the clarity that's needed, particularly in areas around engagement, tasking, disengagement and appeal processes. The report also covers our internal whistleblowing processes. Our new refreshed policy is on today's agenda, and it covers some of the issues raised in the report. And that, I think, is a good start, but it's by no stretch of the imagination all of it. There was then a cluster of recommendations around process discipline. Those things were there's a process in place, but it wasn't always followed. The report looked at a number of cases where provider staff have raised issues with us. And in some cases, I think the full process had not been well recorded, and it wasn't always clear if we'd covered every angle of the issues being raised. And in part, this is a function of our very old technology system and the fact that we use a lot of manual processes behind the scenes. And whilst our new system, I think, will remove and automate a number of steps and address a number of these recommendations, we do need to make sure that the lessons from this work are explicitly designed into our new system work. And then finally, a group of recommendations around culture. This is a complex area. And I think the report flags that we need to redouble our efforts to deal well with issues of race. Whilst it's true that there was no evidence of explicit racism in a formal sense, I would argue it raises some questions that lead to the conclusion that we need to do a better job of walking in other people's shoes, especially when those shoes are worn by people who have different backgrounds or experience to us. The report also talks about how we hear the voices of our teams internally, including how we worked with our trades unions last year on one element of the transformation programme. Since then, our relationship with trades unions has improved, and I know there's definitely a shared desire from both sides for this to continue, and I travel optimistically that they can, as in Scott's words, be a partner for making improvement happen. The report also covers how we feed back to those who tell us things about services, and this, I think, is a particularly challenging area. As in strictly legal terms, we are interested in people's experience of using or working in care services, but we cannot always investigate each individual case. And whilst that might be technically right, it is hard for those who have summoned the courage to come forward to be told that we're not going to pursue their case on an individual basis. Our recent upgrades to our website and investments in other technology are helpful in this regard. But there is a challenge in the report for us about how we better walk in the shoes of those who have told us important and often very personal things with the expectation that something is going to be done. This is a long-standing and difficult issue, but one which we will have to continue to look for ways to improve. Overall, I think this report is wide-ranging and covers a number of issues. Some may be solved relatively quickly, some will take time. And I do want to take the time to carefully consider actions which will make a real difference, especially those issues around how we walk in other people's shoes. Some of the actions are already in train within our people plan or plans in our transformation programme. Some things can be incorporated into existing programmes of work, and some activity will be new. This report, as others have said, I think will be hugely helpful to us as an organisation, especially at this pivotal point in our development when we're introducing new ways of working, moving people into new teams, introducing new technology and taking on substantial new duties across integrated care systems and elsewhere. Useful as this report is, though, I am sorry about the personal toll that this has taken on Mr. Kumar. It's therefore all the more remarkable that he's worked with us in the way that he's done. I would like to finish where I began in thanking Mr. Kumar for his determination to raise the issues he did and to pay tribute to the way that he has worked with a number of colleagues very constructively and very professionally to get us where we are today. Ian, I know colleagues will have some questions, and there is an intention to bring back an action plan at our May board meeting, and then there'll be subsequent updates against the assessment criteria that are embedded in the report. But that's all I've got. Thank you for now, Ian.
Okay, thanks very much, Ian. So we've got about 15 minutes or so for, or longer if needed, for any questions my colleagues might have. About, either from other executives who wish to add, because like Ian, you haven't had long to digest it, you may have a perspective to add, or to my non-executive colleagues, whether you have questions of Zoe and her report, Scott and his report, or Ian's immediate responses. So any of the above. It sounds like reports stunned into silence, but Stephen.
I suppose, firstly, as a non-executive board member, huge thanks. I mean, you've done a remarkable piece of work, Zoe, Scott and the team. Thank you so much. You have given us a real insight into some very difficult issues. Second point, I guess, is that I know we will all recognise our responsibilities as a board. To pick up Scott's point about evaluation, does anything now happen? And there's a responsibility on us as a board and non-executives to hear that point and really make sure that we're following that up. And then there's a third point. Scott, somewhere in your report, I think, there is a comment about other protected characteristics. And what I did just want to ask you, you rightly explored with the team race and racism. Have we fully explored other protected characteristics, or kind of may there be more we need to do on that? I asked that with some trepidation, because, but it seemed to be important whether this, you feel, with the team, is a comprehensive assessment of how we handle all protected characteristics, or not so much yet.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so we did examine a number of elements around, especially around equality impact assessments, where you would expect LGBT, disabled, all across the protected characteristics, age, etc., to be written about, understood, and have data that was provided. There were lots of gaps in data across the protected characteristics. Obviously, race had a slightly bigger focus, but we did examine similar challenges across other elements of data with a variance. So, in an organisation, when you talk about your own staff, you tend to have binary genders pretty well, so male, female, and you have age pretty well on there because of pensions and payments. But then the level of disability declaration, etc., can be very variant. And because of that, the level of knowledge around it in decision making, the knowledge around it in preparation of equality impact assessments was quite variable amongst along the organisation. That becomes important with our kind of inspection and assessment criteria, because of course when you're going out to other organisations, you really need to understand that fully because of our MOU that we have with the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So although we saw more of a consistent nature that was widespread around that lack of competence and confidence in writing, identifying, understanding and being confident about race, there were elements that were not as sporadic across all the protected characteristics that were still not quite at the standard we would hope.
Kate, you wanted to add?
Thank you. If I can just pick up the point about oversight and scrutiny of what happens next. So I think it's really important that once we've had a chance to digest the report and the recommendations, that we plug those recommendations into our business as usual reporting. So later on the agenda today, we've got our business plan for the new financial year with kind of holds where the recommendations from listening, learning and responding to concerns review will, where appropriate, be dropped into that business plan. So there'll be as we report on our performance in normal monthly board meetings, a proportion of this will be captured in that. But also, Scott said it's critical that we're going to evaluate this. And Scott, my recollection is we were thinking about maybe a 6 and a 12-month evaluation point, potentially reconvening this group of colleagues to specifically look at have that series of actions you put in place made a difference that you expected to have as well.
Sure.
Thank you. Yes, I'd clearly like to add my thanks to others, to the teams that have undertaken the investigations, and also to endorse the comments from Ian about the response. But just a thing in particular about the reference to how we can better engage with our SPA colleagues. My experience of SPAs is that their motivation for being an SPA is to improve healthcare services. It's very seldom anything else at all. And I think the onus is clearly on us to help them be effective at that, and for us to respect that motivation, because I think it's very important, and it adds an awful lot to our work, and it adds an awful lot to the way that the health service performs for the benefit of patients. So I really welcome those recommendations. Thank you.
Chris?
Just to endorse what others have said, but thanks to Scott, Zoe and the wider team for the work. It's very valuable. It reminds me a lot of what we do around our work with the public relies upon trust. The trust of people who use services, the trust of people who work in services to tell us what they see when we're not there. And that has guided now a rise in give feedback on care to the extent that it provides a lot of the evidence for 50% of our inspections. But that trust is only possible if we make sure we are responsive in the right way and use the information we get in the right way. And it is a key ingredient that we've got to build and maintain that trust. So I wanted to say particular thanks to the way, the diligence of the recommendations, because I think that gives us a guide for the things that we need to do, both in terms of process and also in terms of culture, about how we use the voice of people who use services and staff in service alongside data and information. But I think we've got, with those recommendations, I think we've got some very robust changes that we can help us in our transformation programme and help us in our business as usual. And just to endorse Kate's point, I think the more we can lock these into how everybody does their job and how we think about the changes that we're making to systems and processes, the more chance we have of making sure that we can build back that trust with people who use services and with people who work in services and help us with our work. But thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions or comments? Jora.
Yeah. So I think, so if I understood you correctly, investigating Mr. Kumar's, complaint, you uncovered 18, I think. Did you say 18? I can't remember the exact number. But in between the people changes, the process discipline changes, the programme transformation, what are we going to do in between? How do we know we won't get another one of, these unfortunate cases in between a period of now and whenever all these other things will get? So what are the sort of, I take on board what you said, that we should reflect and ensure that, we build the right actions. But what's the risk of something else happening in the next month or 2 months? And what actions, short-term actions, can we take to ensure that we're not sat around this table again in a quarter's time?
Perhaps one more for the management than Zoe. Kate.
If I go first, and whether Sean, you want to come in as well. So I think it's important. So the additional 17 or 18 cases Zoe looked at. So you talked about finding examples of good practice as well as things we need to do better on. So there is a really strong theme in Zoe's work, as in workstream 1 around whistleblowing, around far too much variation in terms of how we respond, and we absolutely need to address that. As you say, when our new systems and processes go live towards the end of this calendar year, our colleagues will be supported in that endeavour of being really consistent and really accurately capturing what actions they are taking to ensure that people are kept safe. However, in the interim, this report is a really useful reminder about what our expectations are around whistleblowing. What we find when we look at action taken around whistleblowing is often colleagues have done the action, but actually our systems don't enable them to accurately capture what they've done to keep people safe. So we have the opportunity to say, yes, I've taken action within 5 days, but actually we don't currently capture what action did you take and how are we assured that that's of a kind of quality that we would expect. So the new processes will support us towards the end of this year in autumn when they go live. But in the meantime, there's really strong messaging and conversations we need to have with our teams, with our operational teams, Sean and I as chief inspectors, about what our expectations are of our staff now, our colleagues now, when it comes to responding to whistleblowing. I don't know whether you want to.
So, same point, was it, Sean? Okay. Sorry, Tyson, were you going to say something?
Mine was sort of a related point, which was to say that I think the recommendations, particularly the ones around how we deal with whistleblowing, come at a very opportune time, because we are making some changes to our ways of working, and I think the changes to technology will definitely help. But I wanted to reflect more widely. And to join my colleagues in thanking the team for the piece of work, for the report. I think the way that you framed it, so it's quite clear about how implementing it will lead to better services for those receiving care, better experiences for those we work with on a part-time basis, and those who we work with on a full-time basis, really does mean that you can add my commitment to the commitment of my colleagues in terms of how we implement the report and make sure that we don't lose sight of the important work we need to do.
I mean, if I just add an observation triggered by your thought, Joy, and then some questions from me. I mean, you raise a very fair point about how do we, I mean, some of this stuff goes back to what Zoe was looking at. The original case was, 5, 6 years ago? So I don't think we're pretending that it's suddenly all changed 4 years ago. It's just that the case that triggered it was many years ago. So it's reasonable to think that some of these are ongoing problems. Is a good working assumption. Hopefully less, but there won't. We haven't solved the problem 3 years ago. So I think part of the challenge for the exec team for what they're coming back is to look at the recommendations and consider what are the sort of quicker fixes or lower hanging fruit related to the risk created by no fix. That also, of course, means part of how efficiently or quickly we can do it ties into other things that are going on in the organisation. So I don't think that'll be simple to do, but I think there is a way to identify things that are most important or could be most quickly fixed. And as people have said, I think we've got an example of that. The next item on the agenda is a new speaking up policy. The old one wasn't right. We were going to amend it anyway, so we've kind of fast-forwarded that. I mean, the question I will be asking at the next session, but I think it's been done in conjunction with Scott and Scott's team so that what we've got before us actually ought to reflect some of the outputs from that. So there are things like that can be done quickly. My question, and it's both Zoe and Scott might have a view on this, but if I look at the recommendations, Ian used these sort of 3 buckets, and the first 2, around we haven't got a process, or we didn't, it wasn't working. So those are, to some extent, purely internal. We've got to find a way of fixing that. But it seems to me that quite a lot of what is in here is also holding a mirror up to society. We employ 3,000 people, and I didn't hear anything. If I misread this, please tell me, but I didn't hear anything that said our 3,000 people are behaving in a way that's different from the rest of society. So if, in particular, example, are people uncomfortable dealing with sensitive racial issues? I think probably a lot of people in this country are. Now, therefore, we're not going to say, I haven't heard anyone saying, well, we can't do anything about it because it's a societal problem. We need to try and do some things, not least because it's our pivotal problem as a regulator of the health and care system. But I suppose the question I'm coming to is how far can we go? And it would be the first question, because I rather suspect there are limits if we're dealing with 3,000 people who reflect society at large. And then the second question leading on from that is, and this may be a bit unfair at such an early stage, but it is important we're trusted. That's the reason we're doing this. We are the independent regulator of health and care. We've seen some dramatic examples in very recent days or weeks of problems in the rest of the system. To what extent do you think there are read across, or what we are doing here and the outcomes could be used to the benefit of other parts of the systems, for the benefit of users? So there are 2 questions there, and I appreciate both are quite big questions. You both might want to comment on the first one. The second, anyone who wishes to answer.
Thank you. I mean, I agree that some of the issues that we've looked at are issues that are probably reflected in society at large in terms of difficulty and sensitivity around dealing properly with allegations of race discrimination. In terms of how far CQC can go, and the reason for my specific recommendations around this are twofold. Firstly, CQC as the regulator has a specific obligation under Regulation 13 4A, I am a lawyer after all, to ensure that care and treatment must not be provided in a way which includes discrimination on the grounds of any protected characteristics. So CQC's workforce as a whole has a specific obligation to act on that, which is why it's so important that the organisation itself can do. And the second answer is that the CQC as a public sector, as a public organisation, as a public body, is subject to the public sector equality duty, which means it has an obligation to consider in its functions how to eliminate discrimination and what steps it should take. So it has to grapple with those issues as part of its functions, and that's why they're so important, I think.
Thank you. From my perspective, I think this is a real point that I do think we need to get out on the table and in the room, so thank you for asking it, Ian. So I've got an academic background in race, and I've led, during COVID, the disparity work in the southeast of England for NHS England with regards to looking at COVID. There's a lot of stuff in the media and in the press at the moment, but I think there's a difference between lack of competence and confidence and toxic culture. So to be really clear, I found no evidence of toxic cultures, toxic behaviours, those kind of things. What we did find is people who didn't have the language, the terminology or the confidence to address racism effectively, all those other protected characteristics. That is very different than some other organisations may be challenged with. And I think it's just important that we really are clear what the report is saying, because if I had found those things, they would be in the report, but I didn't. And I just wanted to state that. So I think some of those colleagues have got some of those systemic challenges of trying to do the right thing, but may not have been given the right skills, knowledge and capabilities and confidence to do that. And that's why having an honest conversation around racism and its effect in healthcare, its effect on clinical staff, etc., is really critical. When we remember just a couple of years ago during the pandemic, all of those faces we saw, or over 60% of those faces we saw of health and care staff who were dying, were black and minority ethnic staff. So it's really important that we don't lose touch with that and we look at some of those systemic issues. But I just want to be really clear. What I found was high valued staff, so staff with high levels of value and care with not the ability or knowledge or understanding to deal with racism rather than toxic culture, because I think that's really important and a huge distinction to make.
Thanks, Scott. I was kind of behind my question, but thank you for saying it, because it is hugely important. I think a major reassurance, I'm sure, to colleagues that you didn't find that. So we're not going to solve toxic culture problems elsewhere, but I suppose I'm still working on the presumption that while we're not doing this for the benefit of other people, that if we set these standards of regulators, both what we're trying to achieve, but perhaps more importantly, the way we sought to identify it and evaluate it, that does set a standard that we may not impose as a regulator, but it sets a bar by which we would measure what's happening elsewhere. And it's probably a question more for the management. Yep.
I think just to build on that, I think there are some things Scott was describing that we can do in terms of the way that we describe issues of race. And I think linking to Stephen's point, probably describing other protected characteristics and how we openly talk about it in a way that is structured and clear. But I think there's also something in here about who our partners are. We've mentioned the trade unions in this conversation a number of times. Can we find partners where we can make common cause, partners that can help us scale that structured, mature conversation that Scott and colleagues were alluding to in their report, and we can be a catalyst for change. We're not going to be able to address your question directly, I don't think, change society in a single bound, but can we change health and social care? Can we act as a catalyst for change? Can we identify partners to help us scale that? Yes, I am optimistic that we can, and I think it's certainly something we'd like to give a good go to.
Okay. Thanks, Ian. We'll look at Chris. Sorry, last comment. I'll summarise.
Sorry, just a final thing to say on that. It links to what Ian's just said. There's a really important point about part of our role as an organisation is quality of outcome for people who use services. And go back to my point on trust. We have to, in a sense, reach for good partnership that help us to reach to a higher bar than we might expect in other places. And I think it's important that we have the partnerships and the trust in place so that we can be a haven for people who whistleblow, a haven for people who give us information, so that we can build the right environment to see the right change both in health and social care services. So I think we should give ourselves we have an important job to improve the quality of outcome for everybody that uses health and care services. And the way we do that is, I think, by building strong partnerships with a range of organisations and a range of people that will help us to achieve that. And I think we shouldn't limit our aspiration. We should seek to be the very best in that, within the health and care environment and perhaps within the public sector.
Thanks, Chris. Well, look, if there are no other comments, let me just try to, for the benefit of anyone listening in the minutes, whatever, to summarise what I think we've heard and also be clear on where we go from here. I was appointed almost exactly a year ago. I can confidently say this is the most sober, quiet session that I've had the privilege of chairing a year, and I think that reflects both the issues but also the way it's been received by the board. No one's pretending this makes comfortable reading. It's very difficult reading. And there are clearly some complex issues like the one that's been highlighted, we've talked about many colleagues having, and I've no reason to believe I'd be any different, frankly, not confident in dealing with sensitive racial issues. So we need to address that and the other recommendations. On the other hand, to give some balance, thank you, Scott, for reminding us, but it's hugely important to recognise what you didn't find as well as what you did find, and I think Zoe would say the same, she nods. And I think also we should offer compliments. I'll speak on behalf of the wider board, but compliments to the management team for the way they address this. It's not been easy. It's not going to be easy over the next few months or years addressing the issues, but I'm not sure many organisations would have had the courage both to do this and to do it in the glare of publicity. So I'd like, on behalf of the NEDs, to say thanks to the executive team for the approach they have adopted. As Ian said, I think we now need to leave the executive time to absorb the detail and the recommendations. For the avoidance of doubt of anyone listening, I don't think Ian intended, and I'm not intending that to mean we're going to take ages and kick the can down the road. That's not what it means. What it does mean is a consequence of a lot of recommendations produced by people based on what they saw without the input from management, with no disrespect, runs the risk that some things might be done slightly differently from the way the recommendation was framed. And it also has to be fitted in with a lot of other things. So I think we need to give the executive time to absorb that and also discuss it with colleagues. I've already mentioned there's a kick-off session later on this afternoon. So what we're planning, or I'm suggesting has already been touched on, is that we'll hear more formally the management's response to this and how they propose to take it forward in May, which is our next board meeting. There's a lot of detail in this, which I don't think needs to feature individually in the business plan. But as Kate said, we would like the business plan looked at in the context of this to see if there's anything in. So we don't have the business plan today for formal approval, but if it'll be reworked, the board will consider it offline if necessary, and that will be on the agenda for May as well, so we can consider those two things together. And then we will also, I think it is important that we try to embed things into business as usual. I mean, that's the way you'll get success, rather than having a separate team somewhere else. But we also need to see whether or not what's been recommended has been done and whether it's made the difference. They're subtly different points. So we will schedule some future events, timing and precise format yet to be determined, but a public commitment that will come back to the board so we can see what was done and the evaluation at a later date. As I said, I think the very positive message from this, and it's come through from all of the questions, I think, is that all of this has been done in an open and transparent way. And I would expect nothing less of the regulator of a system, because we can't ask other people to do things if we're not prepared to do it ourselves. I think it's also essential that we do this to help maintain trust in CQC. So again, I think it's hugely important that we have done it this way. As I alluded to in my question, I think part of the challenge will be to set parameters around what we can and can't do. There are some things we can do, but at the end of the day, we are a product of society. So I do take your point. We have some special responsibilities, but we're also all human beings reflective of the society that we live in. I think the final thing is, just to re-summarise, a lot of people have said thanks, but I do think it bears repetition. I'll do it in three buckets, if you like. Zoe, Scott, ladies, and anyone else working on this for the huge amount of effort you put in. Anyone who, by the time they've got round to reading the reports, will know that even writing them, never mind doing the work underpinning them, was a major undertaking. So thank you very much for that. Secondly, I think should mention colleagues. A couple of people have thanked people who contributed to this, but also this has got to be delivered by all 3,000 of us. So it's here discussing it with the wider board, NEDs and EDs, but at the end of the day, the stuff that Zoe was looking at, for example, it wasn't people around this table, so we're not saying shifting in a responsibility, but I think we have to find a way of gauging all 3,000 people. Everyone has got a part, some more than others, but how we do that. So I'd like to thank people for engaging, but also emphasising that the plan or the recommendations when they come back have to find a way of not just what the executive team is doing, but how they're going to support 3,000 people bringing about the changes. And last, but absolutely no means least, just emphasising again, thanks to Mr. Kumar. When this was kicked off, it frankly never occurred to me that he would spend so much time, not just with you, Zoe, because we're looking specifically at it, but also inputting to the work that Scott did. I mean, frankly, if he had a single-minded focus on patient safety. If everybody in the health system had that same focus, probably many of the issues we face, we wouldn't be facing. So I'll just add my thanks to him for the way he stuck with us. So I hope he's listening. But anyway, we'll be in touch after the meeting. I hope colleagues would agree that's a fair summary. I'm looking to those who presented, and you will agree I got it right. So on that, why don't we end this session? Once again, thanks, and we'll be seeing many of you, I'm sure, at future sessions. But thank you very much indeed. Thanks. Well, unfortunately, it isn't one of those events where we can find an easy way of leavening the mood. That was pretty serious stuff. But on the other hand, the first very quick response to that is the speak up policy. So, Kate, I think we're going to be joined by Mary, Cridge and Carolyn Jacobson. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies, sorry to keep you waiting just a few minutes. But, Kate, I think you were going to do a quick introduction to this, and then we'll hand over to the team. Usual rules when we get there. We have read the papers, so you don't need to go through the detail, but highlight any particular points, and then we'll go to questions.
Thank you. So as we said with the previous item, there are some pieces of work that have been in train anyway during the review. There are some pieces of work that will need to be new. And this is an example where Mary has worked alongside. She's been the workstream lead for workstream 2, which is around freedom to speak up. But also Mary was our original freedom to speak up guardian. So Mary established a role in CQC maybe about 6 or 7 years ago now. So really pleased to have Mary Cridge, who's our current Director of Adult Social Care, and Carolyn Jenkins, who's our Speak Up Guardian, join us today. As you have a chance to digest Workstream 2, you will see that this is an area that needs some serious investment. So we had a policy when we first established a role that was of a good standard. We had good investment in the role of Speak Up. That eroded over time. So Carolyn is really the last woman standing in the Guardian role, and for that I want to extend my significant thanks, Carolyn, because there was 3 of you. There's been 1 of you for maybe about a year or so, and that's a huge weight to carry. So we come here today. I'll shortly hand over to Mary with a new Speak Up policy that has been well engaged and co-produced with key stakeholders. I hope it's something that board feels positive about and can approve as a kind of significant step in the right direction to start addressing the issues of Workstream 1. However, this is the kind of first step in the kind of journey we need to go on to get back to where we need to be around Speak Up. So it's going to be critical to land a policy that reflects how we want to be working. But with that will come some investment and some renewing our colleagues' confidence in how we do Speak Up around here. So without further ado, over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Kate. So I'm very pleased to be here with Carolyn, who worked with me on the work stream in the review you've just heard. As has been said, there was already work on a policy in train before the review started, and I don't need to add any context to what you've just been listening to. So to set about this work, we've had support from the National Guardian's Office, both in the form of advice, commentary on drafts and so on. And we asked the National Guardian to point us in the direction of organisations with what they regarded to be exemplar policies. They so directed us, and so we went. And we got great support and engagement from those organisations. As colleagues will be aware, NHS England has the responsibility to set a national standard policy for freedom to speak up, and it is a requirement that all organisations in the NHS and all arm's-length bodies who have an interest in health to observe that. So the policy we're presenting today is compliant with that national standard, as I'm sure you'll agree is befitting for us. The National Guardian describes it as a basic minimum. So we have worked to make sure that it's a good fit for CQC in all our circumstances. We've been able to take account of the emerging findings from the review, not just because we were both involved in it, but in being interviewed by Zoe as part of the inquiries into how we'd handled concerns being raised, it was possible to get a sense of what was coming. And so in our plans, we want to particularly support SPAs and other more casual people, labour arrangements at CQC to ensure that they're fully aware of the Guardian service and how we are there for everybody who works at CQC. Of course, a new policy just doesn't fix a problem. We remain alive to the need to further review and update the policy in the light as the lessons and reflections from the review sink in. We're also recommending that we use the improvement tool that the National Guardian's Office provides. This is a reflection and planning tool for boards and senior leadership teams, and it addresses both understanding and confidence and behaviour and how that sets the tone for speaking up in an organisation. The principles around that tool are detailed in the review findings. So we are recommending this policy to you with the need to continue to work and reflect and develop our confidence, to work with our own academy to ensure that everyone in CQC has some support in speaking up, and for managers and leaders in listening well and responding well when concerns are raised. So we've got some way to go with our own academy. We've got to update and get that material out. So I think this policy can be seen as a link and a bridge to the wider work that we need to do and join up with the other work to develop culture within CQC. So that's all I was planning to say, and we're happy to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Just one or two questions, I know. Just before we do, we're being asked to approve the policy, but also the completion of improvement tools. So can you just say a little bit more about what is involved in the latter? We don't need the detail, but what, in terms of time commitment and outputs, what are we being asked to approve?
Well, it is an assessment tool, so there'll be an element of self-assessment, and then, as with all self-assessments, looking against the 8 principles that the tool has for great speak-up culture, and to see where we are. How do you individually feel in terms of your own knowledge and competence? How do the senior leaders in this organisation feel? And what do we need to do to address that? So it's a bit of a skills and competence mix, and then to put plans in place to address, and then continue to evaluate. The National Guardian's Office recommends this is at least a biannual assessment, which Carolyn and I are keen that we commit to.
Okay, thanks. Belinda, and then I think, Mark, you wanted to come in. Belinda was first.
It's a part of the policy, and it's great to see that you've involved outside organisation, looked at best practice. So that's really good. But I just wonder if you could give us a flavour, Carolyn, of how many staff do contact you, if there's any trends, if there's any trends in grades or that type of...
staff do contact Freedom to Speak Up, and I mean, 5 people contacted me yesterday, through one of the Speak Up ambassadors. I mean, it varies from week to week. It is often inspectors, actually, but I suppose they make up a large part of our workforce. Themes, I mean, more recently, there've been a lot to do with the management of change and the arrangements, you know, the change in the structures, etc. But often there are the things that people come to are just when they don't feel that they've been heard, and they just often we can resolve things quite easily by just giving people that little bit extra support to get them so that they feel that they've been more heard.
Stephen, I got you, but I think Mark wanted to come in. So where's Mark? Mark wanted to come in first, so Stephen and then the other Mark.
Thank you. Yes, I'm on. Got you. Thank you. Well, and thanks, Mary and Carolyn, for this really excellent report, which I support. I just wanted to add that in my capacity, I'm delighted to say that I've taken on the role of the exec sponsor for Freedom to Speak Up Guardians at CQC. I've sat on the Accountability and Liaison Board for the National Guardians Office for a while now, and I've seen firsthand the really powerful benefit that Guardians can have and offer for people to speak up in the wider context. And I think it's so important for any organisation to do this really well, but particularly in health and care, because we know that if people who see problems can feel able to raise them, then it can help us talk openly about the ways in which we can address that and improve, and help us understand problems early on. And we heard from colleagues in the last item about how important Freedom to Speak Up Guardian is for any organisation's culture, that people feel in a psychologically safe environment to be able to challenge the status quo. So it's a very, very important piece of work, and I'm really looking forward to supporting the work of the Guardians. Thank you.
Right, Stephen, and then the other Mark after that. Confusing everyone, but Stephen, you first.
Thank you both. Terrific report, and the bit I particularly wanted to welcome, and Mary and I had a bit of discussion about this, is that this whole policy is integrated, multi-stranded, and it's not instead of good management. In a sense, don't take this the wrong way, Caroline, I always feel that the more we could minimise the number of cases that come to you, crucial as the work is that you do, the better. Because we've got to get to a situation where our managers understand that creating a safe environment in which all of those they manage feel able to speak up to them is absolutely fundamental. That's actually the sort of management culture that we need across the organisation. If it doesn't work, we absolutely need people like Caroline and the Freedom to Speak Up Guardians, but that's kind of not instead of a focus on trying to build a management culture over time that is welcoming of people speaking up about what's going on in their normal working lives. So it's that kind of integration that I really welcome. Thank you.
Mark.
I'd welcome this, and thank you very much for getting this across the line. I think this is it's a really important piece of our foundations for a speak up culture, but it is only, you know, there are other deeper things, to Ian's point earlier, that we will need to do to reinforce this, and this is not owned by one person. I think just as an example, you know, the triage is one of the concerns here. The Guardians can't be the go-to person for every day-to-day trivial issue around the place, or a substitute for a conversation with your manager. Nor do we want serious issues that actually would be better going down another channel being escalated through the Guardians, because the risk is that A, you're overwhelmed, and B, resolving those issues is delayed. There's lots of work required on our policies and getting those in good shape. That is absolutely not your responsibility. So there's a broader team effort there. And if we really are going to get to a true speak up culture, the sort of culture that I think every great organisation aspires to, where everyone feels confident that they can raise issues or concerns, knowing they'll be listened to, knowing that it won't cause them any detriment, and confident that something will happen, that requires a huge cross-functional effort in terms of you have to do training in a different way, we have to do communications in a different way, we have to be open, as we've just been, about things that have gone wrong and what we've learned from them. It's a big journey for the organisation, but I commend you for this first important step, because it won't work unless you've got some of these big foundation pieces in place. Thank you.
So probably more an observation than a question. I don't know if you wish to respond in any way.
Yeah, I'm on. We do try very much to empower staff to feel that they can get a local resolution, so that we'll say to them, go and talk to your manager, and that is the first step in all of it, and we'll signpost people. But I do take your point. There's a danger. We don't want staff to come to Freedom to Speak Up with everything. We want staff to feel confident and safe to be able to have open and honest conversations with about how they feel with the manager. So that's what we're working towards.
So, Jora?
Yeah, sort of unfair question, but I'll ask it anyway. How far do you think we are from the best in class that you've seen? And I know, Mary, you've been on Speak Up for a number of years, as Kate pointed out. But how, sort of your feel, how far do you think we've got to go?
I think, if you agree it, we're just about to have a fabulous new policy that will exceed the national minimum. I think, together with the review that we've had, with the collective insight, particularly from our hospital teams and their well-led inspections, which includes a look at speaking up culture, I think we have good insight. I think we understand that information is our lifeblood, and that we want to hold ourselves to the standards that we expect of others. So I think we know what good looks like. We regulate against it. We enjoy the support of the National Guardian's Office. Carolyn is linked in to communities of guardians. We know what good looks like. I think we're back on track. I think we're on our way. Long way to go, but starts with having this sort of support, and moving forward puts us in a different place, I would say. Would you agree, Carolyn?
I would. Yeah. And support for additional resource in as well, and a commitment to that is really positive.
Joyce, I think you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you for a great report, Mary and Carolyn. My question was along the same lines, actually, as to what support can we provide as a board and executive team, because we heard earlier about intent and impact. It wouldn't have been the intention to let Freedom to Speak Up sort of deteriorate in that way, and we're not looking at best practice. And now having a new policy doesn't in and of itself mean that we're suddenly going to do it really well and meet best practice. So you've talked about the resources, but what can we do to really help support this and make it work? Because it's absolutely vital within this organisation, and for us to understand it ourselves, and so that we can use it for the organisations that we regulate.
Yeah. I'd ask everyone to lean into it, to have a look again at the chapter in the review on speaking up, to read through the policy. When we deploy the assessment tool, really engage with that, to support our guardians when they come to board, and retain that curiosity. And to ask yourselves as individuals, how scary am I as a person to speak up to? We all need to ask that of ourselves. Just because we work with a lot of very pleasant people doesn't mean that we don't look very scary to those of us in the organisation. So, and we forget that, I think, as we rise. ask yourselves, how scary am I? And go that extra mile to make yourselves accessible. That would be my ask. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I'll ask myself how scary I am when I leave. I just had one question. In the on pages 4 and 5, you talk about who should I speak up to, and then internally and externally. And I know this is a real live issue in the financial services world at the moment as to whether this should be an option or whether one should make it clearer that the expectation is you speak up internally, but you can go externally if you feel it's necessary. I just wondered, I mean, in this case, it's written as an option, which I suppose at one level, and it's really building on the point Stephen made, seems to be not entirely right to be saying to people, well, you could talk internally, but if you want, you can write to MP instead. I'm not sure that, if it's intended, is desperately good advice. People are more likely to get a response if they raise it internally. But as I say, I know this is an issue being addressed by other regulators. So is this intentional to write it as a pure option? If not, I wonder if we could consider changing it. If it is intentional, could you explain why it's done that way?
I'd say we'd followed the NHSE standard, national standard guidance, of which this is part. I think it's fair to lay out all the options. And my experience as Guardian, and Carolyn's too, is that most people who speak up want to speak up internally. A few may go external, but generally the second choice is not to speak up at all, and that's what we really are keen to avoid.
Well, we're being asked to approve the policy and the tool. I haven't heard any dissent. Can I just make one suggestion? It says that this would be reviewed after 2 years. It's the sort of policy that normally would be reviewed after 2 years, but bearing in mind it's brand new, quite different, part of a suite where we haven't updated the rest of it yet, and you're going to complete the tool, maybe we should bring it back in 12 months' time and see how it's working and whether we should do something different.
Yeah, thank you. Very happy to do that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, ladies. Kate, we have you on another role here. I think you're down to introduce the Smiling Matters update. Manny. Hello, Manny. So apologies keeping you waiting a few minutes. So Smiling Matters, 3 years on. Kate, over to you.
Thank you, and very warm welcome, Manny, who's joining Mary, who's been with us for the previous item. So we're here to talk today about oral health in care homes, following a important publication we shared back in 2019, where following a series of dental inspectors going out into our care homes, we found a concern around the lack of understanding about NICE best practice when it came to good oral health. We found an absence of oral health care plans, and we found particular issues with dentists coming out to care homes and care home residents being able to get to dentists. So we published that report maybe 4 years ago with really clear recommendations. And then last year we went back out to find out what's changed. So I won't spoil Mary and Manny's thunder, but I want to say we've been talking a lot about our role as a regulator around accelerating improvement. And I think this is a really good example where we bring together our regulatory activity with our independent voice work, which is the function with which we produce accessible reports like this. And we go back and we check the impact. And as you're here today, there have been tangible differences to people's lives and outcomes as a result of the review and changes that people have made out there in the health and care landscape. So it's a report I feel really proud to be the exec sponsor of, but also this is what we do when we do this well, and I'm looking forward to us doing even more of this, which is taking our regulatory insight and delivering really punchy reports that are calls to action that make a difference for our people. So over to you, Mary and Manny.
Thank you, Kate. As you say, further proof that independent voice work works. So we have found improvement. We have followed this up through 50 inspections. And when you consider there's been a pandemic between part 1 and part 2 of these reports, that is impressive. There is much improvement to celebrate, but also some heart-searching moments about what's still to do. There is some good guidance out there. There's some nice oral health guidelines and some excellent resources on other such sources as Marie Curie and so on. Lots of help for care homes in delivering this. So we were delighted to find that awareness of those nice guidelines had shot up to 91% from 61%. So it's almost everybody, but still not quite. When we looked at care plans and whether oral health care featured in care plans, that had doubled, fantastic, but still only 60%, so 40% not covered in a care plan. Training for staff had also doubled, again to 60%, so still a significant 40% gap there. We know this is an area where there's a lot that can be done locally. Maddie and I both took part in a recent webinar with providers to talk about this report, and we had over 800 providers join us. And we had a provider opened up, a registered manager, talking about the action she'd taken to raise awareness amongst her staff and how that had really improved the quality of life. Try not cleaning your teeth for 2 days and see what difference that makes to your life. It's not pleasant. So small actions, big differences for people, which is fantastic. But there was also, in the feedback on this webinar, in the questions, there was an area that was consistently raised that I'm going to hand over to Manny to talk about. Thanks, Manny.
Many thanks, Mary. As Mary's highlighted, we really got some excellent feedback from the webinar, and also last week I was at the British Dental Industry Association showcase, so we had plenty of opportunity to speak to dentists and other care staff. Now, from the webinar, which was predominantly care home providers, the message was very, very clear. The message was that they were very keen to put oral health as priority alongside the NICE guidance recommendation of making it a priority along other personal tasks. So they were very keen. But one of the issues that they raised was difficulty in accessing NHS dental care. So interestingly enough, in 2019, when we did the survey, 6% of providers said they couldn't access NHS dentist. And yet in 2022, that figure had risen to 25%. So that's 1 in 4 care home providers who can't access NHS dental. Now, interestingly enough, when I was at the conference and I got to speak to dentists and other staff, the message that they gave to me was very clear. They were very keen to support care homes. And there have been pockets of really good practice. For example, in the east of England, some localised commissioning has resulted in care homes being connected to dental providers, which has resulted in better care for patients. But the biggest issue dental providers face is the current contract. And they'd love to do domiciliary services to care homes, but unfortunately, their current contract doesn't allow that. So they were keen, care homes were keen. The difficulty was the middle commissioning funding arrangement. So as I've already highlighted, there has been some excellent work, some pilot work of localised commissioning in, for example, the east of England. So we have got beacon sites which show it does work, but nevertheless, things need to improve. And may I also add, things are changing with the dental contract, as many of you would know. From April, NHS England will delegate its commissioning of dental contract to ICBs. So I'm being an optimist. I'm hoping that when it does get down to local ICB level, we should see a lot more localised response to the needs of care home patients in particular.
Okay, thanks very much, Manny. Before I open it up to colleagues for questions, I mean, Kate, given your role in the ICS assessments, any follow on from what Manny's just said?
far, and this is why we are so excited about our new powers going live on Monday. It's been a gap for many, many years where we go out and we identify challenges with providers that can't be fixed by providers themselves. It needs to be fixed by commissioning behaviour. And come Monday, we finally have the powers to have the ability to go and form a view about how commissioning is happening, be that commissioning from local authorities or commissioning from integrated care boards. So this is yet another example about why our role as an independent assurer, assessor of integrated care systems and local authorities is so important.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Any questions or comments from colleagues? Stephen?
And could I just follow up what Kate's just said? And do you believe that ICBs have the funds and the powers to fix this? Or is there some sort of underlying question about the availability of funding to commission on the right scale? I mean, I've heard, certainly in my own local area, that it's just difficult to get enough NHS dentistry commissioned. There aren't enough people out there wanting to do that work at the funding provided. So is it as easy as saying, hand it over to ICPs and it'll all be fixed, or is there some underlying question about how dentistry is commissioned?
So that's a nicely challenging question. Thank you, Stephen. So I think as ever, so when we think about where money gets spent in the system, so if we think about other areas where maybe money isn't spent on prevention, and as a result of that, people end up in crisis and end up getting poorer outcomes in places that aren't best for them. So I think our ability to look at how integrated care systems work is the requirement for them to focus on the totality of their population, to think about notionally having a single pot of money and to think about where that money should be spent to get best outcomes for people. So I don't think it's a silver bullet, but I think our focus when we go out to integrated care systems in the kind of coming weeks and months around how do you understand your population, how are you supporting people to access the right care at the right time and the right place will hopefully support the conversations to flow and to follow in that direction. But I don't know, Joyce and Manny, whether there's anything... or Sean, did you want
to come in as well, then Joyce, if you're Sean.
Thank you, and thank you for the paper. It's really excellent paper and really excellent piece of work generally. I just wanted to note, in reference to the comment you make about the contract, I'm aware the Health Select Committee are reviewing dentistry at the moment and are taking evidence. In the evidence sessions that I've seen, a lot of the people providing the providing evidence to this Select Committee are referencing the contract as an issue that is inhibiting the wider provision of services. So I look forward to the report of that group in due course.
Joyce, do you want to?
I agree with Sean. It is about the contract, and Manny will know better than me the percentage of NHS dentistry that's commissioned, which I think is about 50%. But Manny, you might correct that percentage. But that has to be looked at and fixed for commissioning to be successful, because it cannot be that, and it's a postcode lottery, as in where that 50% falls as well. So that there are areas in the country that don't have any NHS dentistry at all. So that has to be looked at.
Just to respond to Joyce, absolutely. I mean, we've already highlighted this in our state of care. If you look at NHS activity in 2014-15, it was commissioned at 44.1% per 100,000 population. In 21-22, it's dropped, and it's dropped to 49.1%. So there is a reduction in activity being commissioned, and it's also coupled with NHS dentists doing less activity and doing more private activity. So you also need to factor in the inequalities there, because often it's the most deprived areas which have the least dental activity. So London has the greatest, Midlands has the lowest. But yes, it does have an impact on, disproportionate impact on deprived areas.
Chris, I think you want to come.
Just to sort of build on that point, you're absolutely right, Manny. It's in the state of care. I'm looking at the figures in front of me. The work we did in 2021 showed that if you take a December to December 2020-2019, there was a reduction in 6 million units of NHS dentistry in that period of time, which is massive. And that, just to link to Stephen's point, that isn't uniform across the country. It is different in different parts of the country, and that's part of the challenge of ICBs and the ICS arrangements is how do we, what is different in the areas where we see that greater commission of NHS services? What are the ingredients which causes that to happen? I just wanted, if I may, just return to the point of this paper and to something that Mary said before. When we did this piece of work in 2019, I think it was the first time we looked at this piece of work in this way, and we used a variety of different tools to try and understand what would work to drive change and improvement. Often as a regulator, you think to yourself, well, we're going to just take some regulatory action against some organisations. And we did a number of bits of work around, in some cases, directing people, in some cases, working with system leaders, in some cases providing some information. And I think that what's interesting about this piece of work is the effect that it's had has, I think, been a cause and linked to a number of different types of interventions. So it's not a big, thick report that goes out that everybody reads. This is some targeted information, some nudging of conversations that have happened at regional and local level. And what I really like about this is 3 years on, we've been able to see the tangibility of that change. And I think the challenge for all of us is this is a great piece of work, and there's some people, colleagues here today, and colleagues elsewhere that have contributed to it. I think this is an opportunity to use this and in the work we've done before in driving improvement to make sure that what we do at the time we write a first report has the ability to be revisited later, so that we can demonstrate the value of the things that that we took in that original 2019-2020 piece.
Thanks very much, Chris. Okay. If there are no more comments, I mean, in a sense, we're asked to just consider what's happening, but I mean, well done. I did have 2 comments. One I think we've dealt with, which is just making sure we'd reflected on what's working about this. But Kate, I think you dealt with that in your opening remarks. And, there's lessons for this about having the right sort of focus now, use something, bring about improvement. We can't boil the ocean, but there are some things where we can make a difference reasonably quickly. The other thing, simple personal request, but like so many documents, it's very difficult to find out when this was produced. Could we stick a date on the front page so you know? You've got to go a long way through this before you find out when it was produced, or when it's on the shelf will matter. If that's it, then look, thank you very much indeed for both coming along. And there's obviously a few points there to pick up in integrated care work as well. Thank you. Moving swiftly on, as they say. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but I think we can make it up on the next couple of items. We're now looking at the business plan. As we've already said, this is not for approval at this stage. But Kate, do you want to just say a little bit about where we are, and then we'll ask Chris to talk to in a bit more detail?
Thank you. So this is our final draft of the business plan before it comes to board in May. And as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the listening, learning and responding to concerns review, it's really important that we have the opportunity to digest that review and for that review to plug into this business plan as well. So without further ado, I will hand over to Chris.
Thank you, Kate. So yes, as you can see, business plan for 2023 through to 2026 as a final draft. We've set out what we want to deliver, and this time we've tried to ensure there's a clear alignment through to the strategy. So you can see the structure is based around strategic themes. We've also tried to introduce the concept of OKRs. So we've got objectives and then key results, and tried to clearly illustrate how they'll work in the organisation, and we're going to try and flow them right down to individual objectives in the organisation. We've pulled together a summary, so you can see the detail of the structure of the plan, but then to help illustrate this for the reader, we've got a 3-page summary, 1 around objectives and 2 around key results. And as Kate and Ian have alluded to, we've got placeholders in 3 areas for the publication of the LLRC review. Our risks that we've got as an organisation and our budget is included there as well, but that's all I was going to cover, so I would take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Chris. If there are any really detailed points on this, I've got 1 or 2. I suggest we take them offline rather than draft in public session. Any general observations or questions on what Chris has put and Kate put together? can't let you off that easily, Chris. Mark.
I think it's very helpful, and I'll follow up with some detailed comments. I think it's quite important in a few places where we're talking about improvement, and and we haven't yet got to the measures that we're going to use to make sure that we can not only establish a measure, but we can try and establish a baseline as well. So we're not waiting 2 years to work out whether we're moving the dial in relation to that. And just to mention, because it came up in RGC, I think there is work to do in terms of it's great to see a commitment in relation to out of hours inspections, but actually there's work to do in terms of making sure that we're measuring that accurately. It's not inspections that spill out of hours. These are inspections that are intended to take place primarily outside normal working day. But I'll follow up with some decent. But I think it's really helpful.
Thanks, Mark. Any other questions or comment? I mean, it's not like we've never seen anything like this before, and you've clearly taken on board comments in other fora. So not surprising one way if we don't have huge numbers of questions. But if there are none, I just had one. It's whether it's for you, Chris, or Ian. But and obviously the plan can only be delivered if we've got the money. So we've two sources of income. Can you just comment on where we are on having certainty on that income?
I can cover that. So we're level of certainty around our fee income. In terms of grant and aid, we are waiting confirmation from the department for allocation for next year, which will be a core allocation, but also include, for the first time, additional funding around local authority assurance and integrated care systems. So we're hoping to receive that imminently in terms of our allocation, but as yet, we're awaiting confirmation.
Okay. I mean, it is a bit tight because this is a plan starting on Friday, and we're sitting here 2 days before without confirmation of funding. So we're reasonably comfortable it will be forthcoming, are we? Okay. And no doubt you'll tell us PDQ if there's a problem there. Thank you. If there are no questions from colleagues, thank you very much indeed. I did catch up some time. I wasn't expecting to catch up quite so much. We turn to the reporting updates, usual format, but Ian, I'll just hand over to you to pick this up.
Thanks, Ian. There are, as ever, the report from the executive team is split into two components. One is the regulatory matters and one is organisational matters. If I kick off with the regulatory matters, and I'll pause, and then we can move on to the second part. So I think take the report as read in terms of the detail, but there are a couple of things I did want to pull out. One is that we continue to focus on mental health services and for those with a learning disability and autistic people. And the second thing I wanted to particularly pull out from this first section was that from the 1st of April we'll begin our work on assurance of local authorities in terms of their Care Act duties. And the reason this is important, I think, is it's because one of the largest extensions of our powers in quite a long time. And if you add in the work we'll be doing around integrated care systems, this is an enormous extension of powers. But I think more importantly, it will give us an opportunity to really understand the experience of people who use services. And I think we touched on it a little bit there in the previous item around dentistry. But I think ICSs again and again will be the vehicle through which people experience care. And some important conversations around inequalities and so forth will be for the first time able to really have a really good view of that. So it's a really important milestone, I think, in terms of our work. So I'm going to pause there, Ian, and ask questions, and I'll take questions, and then we can move from there.
So thanks, Ian. So questions on Ian's report so far? No. It's obviously that first hour of the day has on the no, okay, I'll leave that for later. Okay, well, if there's no questions so far, why don't you carry on, Ian?
Thank you. So moving on to the second part, the organisational matters part of the report. Again, taken as read, there's detailed performance information there, and colleagues can pick up the detail as needed. But I think it's worth just making the point that during this first quarter of the calendar year, we focused on areas of higher risk in terms of our work in healthcare, as well as in adult social care. But in adult social care, we've gone beyond that, and we've carried out a number of increasing capacity inspections. And that's really about reviewing whether we can see if care services, if care homes in particular, have improved enough for local authorities to place people there. We worked in conjunction with directors of adult social care, and as of the 16th of March, we'd done 487 inspections, with around half leading to expectations of increasing beds. That in turn translates into additional capacity in local health and care systems. So I just want to just record my thanks to the adult social care teams. We began with a target of 300 inspections. They're now at 487, and I think that number is probably a little bit higher than that as we sit here today. So a fantastic piece of work by adult social care colleagues. And so that's all I really wanted to say, other than just to record that fantastic work by the team. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ian. So, again, questions for additional comments? Tyson.
I just thank you, Ian. I just thought it would be helpful if I gave you the hot off the presses figure from yesterday. We're now up to 545 increasing capacity inspections, so well over our 300 target. And just to underline what Ian said, gratitude to the teams. It's not just been the adult social care teams; it's been teams from around operations who have also pitched in, and I think that will make a real contribution to the number of beds available in the care sector.
Thanks, Tyson. Stephen.
Just to pick up on that same point and to ask is great work, terrific to have expanded supply, but is there a bit of a leaky bucket here? Because later on, when we get onto all of that really interesting information about what's going on in different ICS areas, there seems to be quite a pattern of care homes saying, but we can't fill all of the places we now have anyway. So you're successfully increasing the supply of places. It doesn't get us all the way, does it, to those places actually being filled on a funded basis? I'm just trying to sort of see the relationships really between this bit, which is fantastic, and the later information about the actual trends in supply of filled places.
Kate, do you want to comment?
So this has been a bit of an art, not a science, but the reason why we wanted to ask directors of social services to identify these homes for us, and then we use that request alongside our own intelligence, was to say, is there a care home in your patch where if we went out and re-rated, we'd probably find good? Yep. Does that care home have spare beds? Yep. And if they've got spare beds, do they accept your local authority rates? So the reason why we went through the DAS, the Director of Adult Social Services route, was it was key to making sure we targeted our efforts to re-rate services where the local authority could commission. When you look at the information that comes in the report that we'll be discussing next, the two top reasons why care homes say that they've got capacity that's not being used. The first is workforce, so they've got beds, but they can't let people in because they don't have the carers to staff them. And then the second is around commissioning behaviour. So this is our little contribution to supporting system pressures. And we have a notional number of beds that have been released as a result of this work. And we've come to that by, at the point the inspector re-rates and rings up the local authority, we're asking the home, how many beds might this in theory open up? They'd say 10. We note 10 down as a kind of, to give us a flavour of what additional capacity might have been unlocked from that work.
I mean, perhaps as an unfair follow-up, that's talking about the number of beds that are made available. That's important so they can be utilised. We've talked before about problems of being stuck in hospitals, unable to come out. Have we any information or sense of what it's like on the other side of the divide? In other words, are we seeing impacts in hospitals?
I think it's probably too soon to say we've seen impact from this particular exercise. I'm not aware that there's been any step change in the ability of hospitals to discharge to social care sites recently, but we don't have figures from very recent months. So there may be, I wouldn't think what we know now excludes the possibility that there might have been a change.
I mean, one would hope so, but I think if you say we don't know, that's a comment really on our role, I guess, and the information we see. I mean, you know, looking forward a year or so, presumably the sort of thing that the integrated care boards ought to be on top of. Chris?
So we've, from the work we've done with some ICS leaders, it's clear, because don't forget these beds are spread in different parts of the country. So I think we are beginning to see, certainly there's been some improvement. The key thing for me is making sure, as the Adult Social Care Survey will say next in the next item, the ability of the adult social care provider to be confidently commissioned by the local authority and or by the NHS to ensure that capacity is available is I think critical at the moment. So we want to make sure that we not only that capacity exists, but it's well used and it's well understood. And I think bringing this conversation back to ICSs and local authorities in the new assessments will really help make sure it can be one of the key questions that we ask as we go into those conversations in the next few weeks.
Ian, sorry.
And I think to build on that point as well, I think there's a bunch of moving parts here. I think one of which is short-term funding for adult social care, which is largely coming to an end. There's also, I think, the number of locations that are registering and deregistering. Again, 1st of January, as you can imagine, there's a lot of turnover in terms of care home registration and care home deregistration. So I think that sort of registration funding and staffing and then our work are some of the factors that impact on this, and each of which will have a positive and a negative. So it is quite difficult to work out the net impact, although the number of people who are fit to be discharged and are still in hospital remains at a number that's sort of comfortably north of 10,000 at the moment. So it is quite difficult to sort of net these things off in a very pure way. But I think it feels like an important service that we've stood up over the last 3 months, and there's definitely a reflection point as to whether we keep doing this on a kind of ongoing basis rather than see it as a burst of work. And I think that's something we will reflect on in terms of how effective has this actually been in generating localised capacity.
Thanks. Chris, you've noted a number of consultations in here. Seems to be more than usual, but perhaps I just forgot what was there before. But is there anything in there that you'd highlight, particularly to this board, that we ought to be aware of?
I think that there is as you say, there is a growth. Though this time of the year often is when both government and other organisations are thinking about the impact that they want to have in the coming financial year. I think that there's been a number of consultations recently on, in fact, there's the output of one today on the role of ICSs in the future. And I think that there's been a number of conversations about both in terms of prevention in health and social care and the operation of systems that work together. I think what the consultations demonstrate is the importance of the information that we gather across the health and social care system and how that can be used by organisations and different parts of government. Note particularly the work that Chris Tzikis, the Director of Mental Health, has given to the PAC on their inquiry into improving mental health services. I think there's some really important work that will come out of that committee that will hopefully drive some of the things that we've been saying in our mental health report. So I think it's a reflection of the information that we hold that is in some cases unique, and it's also a reflection of there's a growing determination, I think, to make system effectiveness a thing of both the way in which government will work and the way in which government departments will think about their role. And I think we've had a positive impact on both.
Okay, thank you. Kate, I mean, we just came back to the first part of this. We touched on our work in ICS as the local authorities a bit earlier, but noting apart from anything else, this is all very last minute at one level, but for the avoidance of doubt, and bearing in mind there's a public board, could you just clarify exactly where we are, what we're going to be doing at each and when we're going to be starting? I think it might be helpful.
I can. So really pleased that yesterday the final regulations that were needed to commence our new work around local authorities and ICS assessments from April have been made in Parliament. So we have all the legislative changes and commencement orders have been laid to enable us to start this work, which is fantastic. At the end of February, we published our planned approach for local authority assurance, and we published our intended approach around integrated care systems a couple of weeks ago. And they are still, ICS, there are still a few more conversations that are needed on that front. But for local authorities, the plan is that from April, we will spend 6 months looking at 2 quality statements across 152 local authorities. So we're going to look at continuity of care, and we're going to look at assessing need. So we're going to take a view across every local authority and aggregate that up, and the themes from that will be featured in our State of Care report in October. We're going to do up to 5 pilots over the summer with 5 local authorities who hopefully will volunteer to come and work with us. The output of that will be reports that we will publish, and there will be indicative ratings for those. We have a proposal around how we will select those pilot areas. So we need volunteers, but also we've got a plan about hopefully having a good spread across the country, a good mix of urban, rural, etc. And we will continue to work closely with the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services and the Local Government Association to put that offer out there into the sector. And then from September through to December, we'll do up to 20 local authority assessments, and that will be the start of our formal 2-year baselining. So that's local authorities. Integrated care systems, we have been very aware that we are waiting for the Patricia Hewitt a report that is due to publish kind of imminently, and it's important that that lands before we start our work on ICSs. But our current plans around integrated care systems is, again, in the first 6 months, starting from April, we'd look at 42 ICSs through one quality statement, which is around equity of access, and again, aggregate up the themes of that, and that would feature in State of Care. And also towards the end of summer, we would start 2 pilots of 2 ICSs, integrated care systems, where we test the full methodology, publish the ratings, etc. And then we commence our baselining of all ICSs at the start of the new calendar year. So that's our plans with both. But great that as of yesterday, the final regulations to commence this work have been laid in Parliament.
Great, thanks, Kate. I mean, it all sounds very, a lot of debate and some of it last minute, but that all sounds pretty sensible. So as you say, subject to whatever comes out of the Hewitt review, I think technically due this week, we'll see. We've clearly worked with a lot of organisations, including those who will be subject to our review. I think you mentioned the Local Government Association. Are there any... but you do see in the media sometimes people talking about, it could have been done faster or slower or whatever. Are there any sort of unresolved issues out there about what we're doing, or is it all now agreed?
So I think it's important to recognise we've spent the last 18 months working with an expert advised group of people with lived experience, their families, local government, health partners, etc. So our approach that we have published in the last month or so has been based on that co-production, and we are incredibly grateful for the input we've had from local government, in particular around local authority assurance, to shape our plans. So we've got to a point where I think there is broad support for our approach going forward. I think new assurance assessment always comes with possibly a degree of trepidation, which is why the fact we did test and learns last year, which is our pilots, and the fact we're going to do some more pilots as these new powers switch on from Monday, I think that's critical in terms of building confidence about our approach as well. But we've got to this point in the day through fantastic kind of collaboration with our people who use services and our stakeholders to design the approach we're going to be going live with.
Thanks so much indeed. So any other questions or comments from the reporting updates? Okay, well, thank you very much for the executive team for those updates. Why don't we move on? Chris, I think this is all down to you, presenting a report you've done on our work in the integrated care system and adult social care. We touched on it already.
We have indeed, Chair.
Kate and Ali, you were going to be leaving in 5 minutes, so by all means, if you want to go now, it might be more sensible. Thanks.
Just to say, with thanks to colleagues in the Data and Insight team as well as the Engage team, this is the first report of its kind that brings together some of what we know from the early analysis of both providers and ICSs. And it helps to pick up on some of the regional trends and differences that we've begun to see, and we've actually seen through state of care over the last 2 to 3 years. We will use this and other data to help inform some of our early conversations with ICSs. Just to give you a sense of what the report shows, and obviously you've got the detailed information in front of you, the scale of the variation, both in terms of its breadth and depth, is quite significant, and perhaps more significant than we felt 2 or 3 years ago. Adjoining regions have significantly different disparities in terms of quality of care. Some regions face challenges across multiple domains of care, for example, reducing bed numbers in adult social care, which can lead to increasing ambulance handovers, and obviously a combination of those can often lead to lower ratings. The piece of work that we did sort of alongside this was a survey directly of adult social care providers, and we wanted to try and understand perspective from them. It's true to say that adult social care providers want to work in partnership with their ICS, their wider ICB colleagues, but there is a challenge that remains around sustainability, staffing and commissioning. So we want to use this information to help inform some of the conversations with ICSs in the coming weeks and months. We also want to help explore and address the longer-term challenges. If we are to improve outcomes for people, and if that in areas where there is higher and lower degrees of deprivation, what are the challenges for local leaders in different areas, and how does CQC work with those local leaders to share innovation across a local area and to help ICSs tackle the problems it faces? In terms of adult social care, it's clear that the workforce shortages are still the significant limiting factor in driving growth into the adult social care market, and this has been felt more significantly in some areas than others, as was highlighted by the sector pulse check that Care England pointed out and produced this week. Finally, the importance of involving those responsible for delivering and receiving care together can't be overstated. We've seen already many good examples of ICSs that have really looked at the relationship between organisations and people using services and designed service transformation around them. So we want to make sure that we can use this work going forward in the months to come to not only describe what we see, but also to describe where we see good, innovative and outstanding practice. I'll pass over to questions, if that's okay, Chair.
Could you, just before we go to other questions, just clarify for me, Chris, a little bit more about the source of the data in here and exactly what it is that we plan to do with it?
So the data comes from three, I guess, key sources. The data that we hold from partners such as NHS England, so that forms a basis of much of the information that we hold about the NHS. The data that we glean ourselves from our own inspection activity and our own data collection, and as I mentioned earlier, the survey work that we did that was unique to this piece of work. So those three components make up the summary of the information which forms the report. Obviously, the first two of those will be an ongoing dissection of data, and we hope to be able to replicate this. I think one of the really interesting things for me is that as we move to our new model of working, where teams are coming together with their cross-sector experience, I'm really looking forward to us being able to form a view of areas through the work that teams do. So hospital inspectors working and teams working with adult social care teams, working with primary care teams, to form a view of a patch and to give an ongoing commentary about what's happening in that area and why. So I think this is the beginning of something that will hopefully drive an understanding of how areas are performing more in real time, which again will help us, I think, in trying to drive improvements and change in each local area.
Okay, thanks. So, colleagues, Linda.
Thanks. So, Chris, I'm just looking at the Adult Social Care Survey, and as you say, it gives some really good insights, but is not representative. So I would say, is it about a 16-17% response rate? And I just wonder if you had any thoughts of you and your team, how you can increase that response rate.
So we deliberately cut it short because we wanted to make this board paper with the other piece of information. We've been talking to colleagues in adult social care, Martin Green in particular, and I think there's a way of making this a regular occurrence. This is the first time we've done this work, and I think Martin would say that they just completed a similar survey, but I think the way we can do this together to form a constant view of how things are changing. Going back to my conversation we had earlier about trust, I think there's also something about, well, why are you asking these questions? Are we going to be regulated against some of the outcomes? And actually we're looking through a different lens when we ask these questions. So I think it's about making sure that providers feel confident about how we use that information. Hopefully today, as they've seen the outcome of this, they'll see that what we're trying to do is to form a picture of how areas are performing. So I'm confident that we can improve the participation in this survey. I mean, just to say, it's bigger than most surveys that other organisations put out in terms of volume. I absolutely agree with you. It could be better, but I think we'll as we gain the confidence and the trust of providers about how we're using this information, I think we'll more regularly be able to get into it. I think the other part of, and Mark and his team have demonstrated this on numerous occasions, the more you can simplify the process of completing the information, the more you can make it easy to complete, and the more it fits in with their view of how they interact with us more generally, I think we'll be in a much stronger position. And again, I'm really excited about the work we've got on the provider portal, because I think it gives that ability to have more real-time conversations with providers, them to provide the information in what is a meaningful way for us that enables us to provide more contemporaneous commentary on what's happening in each area.
Can I, Chris, just on that theme, just be quite clear, understand, you said that the survey is not representative. Well, I can understand, statistically that's correct. But do you actually mean it's not representative, in which case what's the real picture? Or are you trying to say that it may not be representative? I'm not trying to trip you off on the words.
I didn't say that. I didn't say it wasn't representative.
Yeah, the report does.
I think it was my question.
So it says it's not representative.
So I've spoke to colleagues in different parts of Adult Social Care in Care England. They think that the outcomes here are exactly the same as the outcomes that they've received elsewhere with the survey work that they've done. So I think this is representative, just to be really clear. In a technical sense, it may not. It's a small sample size, but I think the outcomes and the information that we've gathered here are consistent with what Care England and other organisations have gathered. One of the really interesting things about this. It explores, I think, in some interesting detail, what organisations need to be financially stable. And I think one of the interesting things that Martin and I were talking about was what are providers looking for in terms of financial stability and being able to recruit. So one of the issues is the challenges around recruitment. And I think there's it's a sort of a known issue that adult social care organisations are struggling to recruit. Part of the issue in some areas relates to what price they can charge at, and the other in other parts it relates to do I know I'll have the continuity of funding in place in 2 years' time? And I think trying to tease out what issues are in what part of the country at what time will be interesting. So I do think this is representative. I think talking to colleagues who are outside here, they confirm that the information is representative of what they found elsewhere, but I think there's more work we can do to increase the regularity of this and to make it more part of just how we gather the information more generally.
I mean, it sounded very detailed, but that sounds right in what I've assumed, but I think the risk is that we undermine the report by the comment. The pages aren't numbered, but it does say here it gives insights, but it's not representative. I suggest you change those words to say that it may not be statistically representative, but based on everything you've seen, we think it probably is. Whatever the words would be, but I think you undermine it by those words.
We'll make that change.
Any other questions or comments? We're suddenly racing through all these things. Chris, I just had in the intro you referred to sort of unused capacity of between 10% or whatever it was and 100%. And I originally thought it was a typo, but then I see that's in the main report. So what sort of organisation has 100% unutilised capacity? I mean, other than the bankrupt one.
So, as we talked about this earlier in terms of registration, when organisations are initially registered, they will have unused capacity at the point where they establish themselves. So there are a group of those, and actually there's a number of organisations that have come into being that they're not taking over an initial organisation, but they are relatively small. I think there is an interesting juxtaposition with organisations that have got sort of in that 10 to 20% capacity range, which is a combination of what they would need in terms of financial stability to feel that they can unleash a sort of another area of their organisation, and also what they would need practically in order to recruit the right staff to deal with that. And I think this is one of the things that's worth exploring further about, well, what is the actual barrier to unleashing that potential? As Kate said earlier, we've focused Tyson's work on the inspections to drive up capacity have mainly focused on organisations where we know the spare capacity can be utilised because they will conform to local authority rates. One of the things that Martin's survey, Care England's survey, talks to is the fact that there is a delta in some areas between what a local authority is willing to pay and what a provider's minimum charge would be to release the capacity. And I think it's trying to explore some of that in different parts of the country that may help us have better conversations both with local authorities and actually with ICSs.
Okay, thanks. I mean, clearly it would be interesting to know more about why they're all, I mean, what the blocker is if it's 100%. I mean, I now understand the logic, but it is pretty extraordinary in a way. Jora.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think it's really good, by the way, Chris. I think it's good, sort of solid data, and we'll always vet it and improve it. I think over time I'd be interested in where you see this going, because you've given a really good sort of overview, and and there's certain patterns that you're sort of seeing, capacity with financial stability, with, recruitment. Over time, do you see this moving into where you can see, rather than just looking at each PowerPoint slide, where we're actually seeing cause and effect and pattern recognition?
Yeah, absolutely that. So, I mean, what I tried to do with this is to set a baseline deliberately before we took over the formal assessment of ICSs and local authorities. What I really want this to do, going back to the point I made, I really like this to become perhaps a quarterly update on how we see areas performing across both health and social care, so we get a real sense of how things are changing as a result of ICB, ICS, local authority action, and to try and draw out some more detail around the cause and effect in particular areas. Because I think that the beauty of this, hopefully, is that we can begin to look at cause and effect in an area as opposed to a national picture. I think that gives us more understanding when we come to regulate ICSs and local authorities, and hopefully it will give those organisations a sense of what's worked and what's not worked in other areas. So I really like to see this become a sort of a regular feature, perhaps a quarterly feature of what we do that gives an understanding that builds into a state of care, which is obviously once a year, but it's tangibly designed to be an aid to ICSs and local authorities to let them understand how their area is working. If they're thinking about their 1 year or 3 year plan, they can look at our information and it can act as a guide for the things that they think they need to do. And also they can look at what's happening elsewhere to see if there's anything they can learn from other partners. But that's exactly what I'd like to try and do with it.
Ian.
And I think just to build on that, I think what it's explicitly not attempting to do is to kind of rate ICSs or regions. I think what this does is asks a really important set of questions. It demonstrates variation. It asks questions, presents information in a slightly different way, which I think gives the leaders of these areas an opportunity to ask those questions and to look at how whether their actions have driven improvement. It is explicitly not, though, some attempt to rate things in a fairly crude way, which is not what this is intended to do. So I thought it was important just to kind of say that explicitly, because sometimes this sort of these tables can be sort of misinterpreted in the wrong ways.
I mean, Chris, it would presumably be useful. You say you want to do this more regularly, but as the ICSs mature, sharing it with them, and obviously this isn't done. This is, I mean, it's one of the powers done by region, so you start to move away from the potentially misleading national statistics, and this shows there are big variations around the national averages, but it doesn't map exactly to ICS/ICB regions, so they may have a view on whether there's a way of cutting it that would slightly different, presumably. On the first bit, I mean, this is some of this is just clear down to A&E, so sorry, down to NHS. So just at random, 1.8 talks about the proportion of reattendances to A&E. I mean, I presume NHEC would roughly be aware of this and might have a reason, but have we discussed this with them?
So yes, just to say on the regional analysis, this is our. We will be able to get into a more granular picture. Interesting, some of this is captured at the moment in a regional way by colleagues in NHS England, so it's not yet all captured in a way that splits out ICSs. So in a sense, we're partly working with NHSE on how this will work. This is their data, albeit cut in a particular way. One of the things we're trying to do, to go back to Jura's point, is trying to draw some relationships between return to A&E, access to community care, and the implications of why we did some work on the Birmingham system before the ICS in 2019. I remember that Birmingham was one of the areas of the highest rate of readmittance, and it was also one of the areas at that time that had the least availability of community-based care. So there was less support for people outside hospital. Therefore, more people ended up back in hospital. And I think those are the sorts of links that we wanted to try and draw out. I deliberately didn't try to draw too much of that this time because I wanted it to provoke questions and conversations. To your point, this will be used in our conversations with ICSs and ICBs. So I deliberately didn't want to be too, this is what this means, but I wanted to use it to open up conversations and questions with ICSs and also with colleagues in other national organisations as well, which is why it's presented in the way that it is, to try and frame better conversations that can help us with the next version of this that we publish.
Thanks. Any more questions? Okay. Well, Chris, thank you very much indeed. I mean, interesting piece of work, but obviously this is kind of version 1. There will be different versions in the future, so we look forward to updates. If we move on, we've got a number of governance-related items. I mean, the first is just the minutes. They were circulated previously anyway as our normal practice. Any comments, or can we take them as a fair record? Don't see any comments. Okay, approved. There was only one action. Chris, you might just comment on this, because the due date was down for today, but I'm not quite sure it's shown as on track. So where are we on this? Presumably, although the due date was today, it would be picked up on a future performance report. Is that right? But is it on track to do that?
I think we've covered everything that was asked in terms of improvement. So my suggestion would be it can be closed out, but if we think there's anything still open, happy to look at the action.
So you're saying it would have been closed out on the previous report, which I must admit I thought it was, but it was shown as okay. If colleagues are happy, if there are new comments, we'll pick them up on the next report. Okay. So we got a couple of reports from board committees. The first is the ARAC. Jeremy, I explained earlier, I think, that you are standing in the shoes of, but delighted to have your oral update. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was going to give you a quick oral update on the feedback of the meeting held earlier this month of the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee. Probably four main areas to discuss briefly. Firstly, the annual report of accounts for 2021/2022. These are still not finalised, not a position we want to be in, but the delay is because the National Audit Office is still waiting for reports from the auditors of the local government pension schemes, in particular for Teesside. This forms a material item in the balance sheet, so they cannot issue an unqualified audit opinion until they have that information. The good news is that they have had the information in the last few days, so hopefully we'll be able to close the accounts fairly shortly, and we are expecting an unqualified opinion unless something unexpected has come out of the local government pension funds. This is not a problem specific to the CQC, but a general problem in the sector. Before the pandemic, we would have expected these reports to be with us before the summer recess, i.e. in July. So obviously the fact that some of them are not coming through until March the following year is not good. And the CQC, along with the NAO, have been chasing regularly for the results and are seeking the assurances that perhaps the delay will not be so excessive next year, although we are not hopeful that it will be back at pre-pandemic levels. Secondly, we did the normal review you would expect an audit committee to do of the risk register, with a particular focus on those risks that where there's a high gap between our tolerance and our mitigation, also where there's where our mitigation doesn't seem to have much impact on risk, and also those above our risk tolerance. And we continue to do that and feedback and make changes to the risk register. One of our sources of assurance is a comprehensive internal audit programme, and the audit programme for 2022-23 is on schedule. Is behind schedule, but we are assured that sufficient work will be done in time for the internal auditor's opinion for our accounts for this year. 4 reports were reviewed at the meeting since the last meeting in December, and their findings are presented and discussed. There are still 5 outstanding, but as I say, they will be complete before the audit opinion. I won't go into detail, but we did do deep dives or updates on transformation risk in operations, transformation resourcing, technology, data, insight, and counter fraud as well. So there's a lot of detail going on behind. And then finally, final planning for the 2022-23 accounts, which are going to happen very shortly after the 21-22, and also planning for internal audit for next year as well, so we can get on better on the front foot in terms of getting that work started earlier. Unless there are any comments from colleagues who were at the meeting or any questions, that was my report.
It was a very long meeting as well, wasn't it, Jeremy? 4 hours or something. Any questions from colleagues for Jeremy? No? Mark, do you want to tell us where you got to on the last RCG meeting?
Thank you, yes. Just an update on what was the second meeting of our sort of relaunched and reshaped regulatory governance committee. At our committee, we're looking at the design of our regulatory model, how we're implementing that design, and what insights we have as to that it's actually effective in delivering the aim of that design. Broadly, our meeting falls into 2 parts. We have a core paper where we look at changes to regulatory design, either things we've initiated ourselves or things that are changing externally. A developing set of KPIs relating to implementation and effectiveness, and then any third-party insights we can draw on to see how we're doing. I think we're making good progress, particularly in relation to focusing down on a suite of KPIs that are going to give us the insight that we want. The 2 significant sort of changes that we looked at were, first of all, the agreed operational posture for NHS acute services and GP providers during the winter period, and the assurance that we were successfully targeting indicators of the most serious risk there. So it was a good test of our risk-based approach to regulation, and we were encouraged by the evidence that we've seen that we are getting to risk through those targeted inspections being more likely to lead to RI or inadequate ratings. The other key area which Ian and Tyson talked about earlier, and Kate, was the successful efforts to safely add capacity to the adult social care sector through increasing frequency and number of first-time inspections. An area that we've looked at the board before is, our surveillance powers under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. That is an area that is fraught with risk, in that you've got to make sure that you do this. If you do it, you do it right. The focus of our discussion at RGC was on the proposed controls in relation to that. Were we to do it? And we were, I think, greatly assured by the rigour of the governance and accountability structures that are in place in relation to that, and how we might manage it if we do it. The deep dive that we did this time was on our ratings and inspections process. It was helpful for all sorts of reasons, not least that I think it significantly added to our potential bank of KPIs for our core paper. But it also highlighted something that's in our toolkit, and our ability to suspend ratings, which is something that we do very rarely. We looked at a few examples where we have done it, and I think there's opportunity for us to use that tool more frequently. Our next meeting, we're possibly rather ambitiously trying to do 3 deep dives. We're going to have a look at registration, and what insights and assurances do we have that what we're letting through the front door is of the right quality. We're looking at silent services, those services where we don't have the benefit of insights from whistleblowers or people speaking up in the service. How can we be sure that without that core source of information in our toolkit, we're getting to the right risk? And we're also going to have a look at our role in relation to market oversight and the interventions that we have available to help shape the market. So that will be for the next meeting.
Very full agenda. Thank you for the report, Mark. Any questions for Mark? No? Okay. Well, look, thank you for that. I think that brings us on to any other business. I did flag at the beginning there were 2 points I wanted to pick up now regarding board-level appointments. So I'll take them individually. The first is appointment of a senior independent director. It's not a mandatory regulatory requirement, but it's certainly regarded as good practice. I think we should have one. We did, but that was Mark Saxton, who stood down a few weeks ago since the last board. So we should have another senior independent director. I have talked to people outside the room, so this is no big surprise for anyone listening. Was proposing that Mark Chambers should take on the role. Mark's worked with a lot of boards in different sectors, both public and private, so I think well experienced of the way these roles would operate. So Mark is very willing to take that role on, so can I have colleagues' agreement that he will become the senior independent director? Thank you very much. And then the other, and it links a little bit back to the very first session today, is the Speak Up Guardian internally. That role, albeit with a different policy, but that role was held by the chair of the audit committee. That is a relatively normal construct in my experience, but it's not a mandatory requirement. The board chair of our Audit, Sword and Risk Committee retired from the board at the end of December. I did mention earlier when I introduced Jeremy that we have not yet got agreement to advertise for a new Audit Committee chair. So realistically, I can see it being 6 months away before we appoint anyone at best. Or rather, we don't appoint before one is appointed. And I don't think we should be without. But Jeremy, although doing a great job chairing the Audit Committee, I don't think is the right person to take on the role because he's not a member of this board, and I think it's important it should be a member of this board who takes it on. So have asked Stephen Marston if he will take it on. Stephen, in any event, is on behalf of the board providing a link to and some oversight of the NGO, which I know from feedback from them is going well, and thank you, Stephen. So actually, I think there's a bit of synergy here anyway. What I suggested to Stephen, if he could take this on temporarily, that's not to say it will necessarily change, but I think we would expect several new appointments, NEDs, over the course of next year. And I think at that stage, rather than have 3 people on the board now who've got a huge number of responsibilities and 3 that have none, it would make sense just to look again. But, I mean, as I say, that's probably some time away. So Stephen very kindly agreed to take this on. So with colleagues' agreement, I would like to say, and it will go straight on the website straight after this meeting, that has taken on the Speak Up Guardian. So if everyone's happy, well, that's dealt with. And that, Mark, complements the point you made earlier about you having the executive responsibility. So those were the 2 any other business I wanted to raise. I'll just look around the room as to whether anybody else wanted to raise anything. Okay, well, look, that concludes the formal business of the meeting, so I'll close that down. As ever, though, we have invited questions from the public, and there are actually quite a number. So probably Ian's going to have to answer a few because one I was going to get Kate to answer, and Kate has left. But let me take them one by one. We have some questions from Mr. Robin Pike. I can ask you, Chris, to answer the first one, which is how are members of the public who express concerns to CQC kept informed about CQC's responses? And I know we touched on some of that earlier, but if you could address the question.
We did, and it's sort of changing over time. But at present, everyone receives an acknowledgement and a thank you for the information that they share with us, either through Give Feedback on Care or at the NCSC. The further follow-up of that is led by the inspector. Now, I know our LLR review and the recommendations that we've talked about today, I think we need probably a more consistent approach for how we feed back to people and how their information is being shared with us. So we've got some thoughts about how we'd more consistently do that, partly through the use of technology and partly through the way in which we may change some of our systems and processes. But it's fair to say that it is used at the moment to give people acknowledgement that we have that information. I think with the way in which we want to change our systems, there'll be more of an ongoing dialogue that we'll have with some people. The other thing that we'll try to do in the output of our inspection processes is to give more real-time feedback on what people are thinking about an organisation, so it will also feature there. So at the moment, it's certainly at the discretion of the inspector. Going forward, we want it to be linked into the response we make to the LLR review and to confirm that we'll make some process changes to make it easy for people to see how their information is being used.
Okay, thanks very much. And I know we have touched before on also the need to work with others on that. So, for example, certainly in the social care sector, things might go to the local government ombudsman, and we've talked about how to have clarity between the 2 of us so we're clear who it is that people should be speaking to, because it does depend on the nature of the report. Sean, a question for you, and this is very specific. How is CQC currently regulating the University Hospitals Birmingham NHS Foundation Trust?
Thank you. We undertake ongoing monitoring of this trust, as well as we do with many other trusts, obviously, in line with our policies, procedures and regulatory remit. We also engage on a frequent monthly basis. Our local teams engage with the Trust on a monthly basis to discuss any issues of concern. Recent activity, regulatory activity, includes the identification of a number of concerns at a number of locations in the Trust. As a result of those, we undertook unannounced inspections of those locations in December of 22, last December. We've also recently, in February of this year, undertaken a maternity inspection as part of our maternity inspection programme. The outcome of those inspections was that we've taken some enforcement action, but the reports from the inspections will be published in the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you very much, Sean. And there is another one for you. This one's slightly more general. The question is, how is CQC currently regulating private providers of medical services, particularly those that are providing mental health services? So that's a question, although there's a rider that says there seems to be increasing activity within the private sector, which I guess is behind the question.
Yes, we're not aware of any great increased activity in the private sector. It's true to say that we're doing no fewer inspections than we've done, but I don't think there's any great increase in the activity in the private sector. In terms of mental health independent sector providers, we regulate those in line with our risk-based approach. As part of that, we have assessed some of the larger providers recently. The methodology for those larger providers is a little different in that we undertake a well-led assessment of the organisation as a whole, but we undertake core service inspections at specific locations. We also have a dedicated independent health oversight team that liaise with the organisations, with the leadership teams in the organisations, and with our local inspectors, so that there is greater focus on those organisations as appropriate, as and when appropriate.
Thanks, Sean. And I mean, I won't put Tyson or Chris on the spot, but I mean, we do publish in due course the registrations by sector. So, I mean, the facts as to whether or not there is a change in private sectors we regulate, I guess, will come out at that stage. But as I won't put you on the spot for specifics now. And then we have two questions, both from one of our internal colleagues, a man called Matthew Egan, who's the Unison National Officer. And they both, I guess, relate back to the first session we had this afternoon. To some extent, I think we probably answered them, but nevertheless, we should respond to the questions now. I'll take them individually. So the first question was, what lessons have the Chair and the Board learnt from the LLR review in respect of how they listen to and engage with the joint trade unions at CQC? Ian, I was going to ask to respond to this, although the question does say Chair and Board, so I don't actually know what Ian's going to say. I will add to it if it's appropriate.
Thanks, Ian. I think as we discussed earlier on, I think we've just seen the review. We know that we've had some very positive conversations with our union colleagues over a number of months, particularly around transformation and wider issues. I am optimistic that we'll be able to read that report together. And as Scott mentioned in his concluding remarks, the trade unions are a key partner in delivering the actions in that report. So I'm optimistic that we can learn a number of lessons together. And I'm particularly interested in the conversations we can have around race. And that whole issue of confidence in talking about race. I think the trade unions could be a really powerful partner in developing our response in that area. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, just picking up an inference in here, it does say the Chair and the Board, how they would engage with the trade unions. I mean, as we said before, I think the Board is a unitary board, but it comprises the Executive, who do have a responsibility for leadership of the group as a whole, and that would include, among other things, engaging with the trade unions. I don't think it would be the right answer for the non-executive members of the Board to deal directly. I think would do as we did before, that discussed as a unitary board, discussed openly with the management some challenges, and the management, as we heard earlier, have taken action to do things, including the review. So I would agree with what Ian said entirely from our perspective, but I think it's probably helpful just to make that distinction between the non-executive members of the board and the executives. And then Ian, the second question, similar vein, but what steps will the Chair and the Board take to ensure the trade unions at CQC are fully and meaningfully engaged by the CQC senior leadership in the future?
I think, as I said earlier on, Ian, we are already, I think, meaningfully engaged with the trades unions on a number of topics. And I know Tyson and Kate have been speaking to them very constructively about what's in the LLR review itself. And in fact, that's exactly where Kate is now talking to union colleagues, and I'd expect we'd have a number of similar and positive and constructive conversations in the same spirit we've been having them over the last few weeks. Thank you.
Again, just as a point of detail, I hope I'm giving the right clarification here. Although, I mean, the work was commissioned because of things we knew, including through the Pulse survey, the staff surveys we did, but the management have not been involved directly, or the senior leadership have not been directly in production of the review. I only saw the results the other day. So, I mean, and the colleagues outside the board had not seen the report until a few moments ago. So, you know, although Ian's said he thinks now relationships are much better, to be fair, when you specifically go to the report, the discussions between the senior executive and the colleagues here about the content of the report are taking place as we speak. I mean, people hadn't got them before, and I doubt very much, given the several hundred pages involved, that in the next hour they'll be going through the minutiae of it. So I think, again, just building on Ian's answer from my perspective, the answer will be in very large part the discussions that are planned with all of our colleagues over the course of the next few weeks and reporting back in May.
And my just build on that point, really, I'm hoping we can reflect back the tenor of the union, the conversations with the union colleagues in May. So I'll just come back to that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Ian. So I think that brings us to the end of the questions as well. So if that's okay, I'll formally bring the whole session to a close. There's no point in repeating thanks to absent colleagues, although we have noted huge thanks to the people at that first session, but thanks to my colleagues around the table. And for those listening in, we'll see you in about 2 months' time. Thank you.